Hi everyone, I'm Lorenzo Bagnoli. I'm an investigative journalist at TRP Media. Thanks for joining us at this training session for DATACROS III. This is a European project where civil society, like journalists and members from the academics and from law enforcement and other bodies cooperate each other to work on a very specific tool to try to understand opaque corporate structures, and in order to try to give more transparency to the corporate world, and trying to understand whether there are important things that can be flagged out thanks to this kind of tool. And today we're going to present some of the cases where we have either used the DATACROS or other tools to investigate public interest topics, and we will do it from now until 4 p.m. And I will give right now the floor to Michael to introduce the DATACROS tool for the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Yeah, so I'll present a little bit about the project and then give, let's say, like a preview demo, kind of the tool to show you guys what we're talking about, and then hand it back over to our colleagues from ERP to go through the cases. Can you guys see my screen? Yeah?
We do.
Yes.
And now it's in presentation. Okay, perfect. So to give a little background about the project and the context in which this project sits, as Lorenzo mentioned, we deal often with opaque corporate structures. And indeed, when talking about organized crime or financial crime now, we're talking a lot about a kind of fusion between the legal and illegal economy. Corporate entities are being very much used by organized crime, whereas in the past, maybe organized crime sat on the outside of the legal economy. Maybe, you know, they found their way into companies, they hollowed out these companies, and they moved on. Now we're dealing with them integrating properly into the legal economy, and part of that is because they've realized being in the legal economy has advantages. They can access public funding, they can launder illicit proceeds, and also they're starting to increasingly use virtual currencies and virtual assets as a way of laundering, but also as a way, sort of as an investment. So we're seeing this fusion, and DATACROS comes out in the idea of working to keep pace with this changing state of financial and organized crime by equipping authorities as well as civil society organizations and journalists with a toolbox that lets them understand these corporate structures, evaluate them, and really advance the investigative capacity of these agencies and journalists. In terms of our team, what the project is made up of, it's a consortium of law enforcement, asset recovery offices, financial intelligence units, technical partners that bring that expertise to help develop the tool, and also investigative journalists and anti-corruption and competition authorities. We're indeed working together hand in hand with these practitioners. We can develop this tool in a way that's very applicable to each of their use cases and comes out of a point of integration with them. So where they're needed, where these tools are needed and what these tools are needed to do is how this tool is developed. It's not being developed, let's say, in the private sector and then entering into use. So it's not being repurposed for investigative journalists. It's being developed with investigative journalists and civil society to work specifically for the use case that there is. In terms of activities, then, we primarily have three. One is conducting research, so understanding risk and infiltration of the economy by organized crime and how this looks, the dimensions that are present of this. So we conduct that research, and that comes a lot from the academic experience, but also, of course, from talking with investigative journalists and seeing what you guys see and seeing what law enforcement agencies are dealing with, and that we can understand then how to develop the tool. As I mentioned, you know, we create this platform that takes from that research and becomes useful and applicable to the real world, let's say, of organized crime and financial crime. And then training sessions like today, where we bring this tool, but also general best practices and know-how, overcoming, let's say, the national silos. I think the advantage of these European projects are always that the partners come from all over Europe, and with that, we have different experiences from all over Europe, and so we can share that with the general public, but also with each other when working on this project. Now, today's training, as Lorenzo mentioned, is dealing with mostly investigative journalists and civil society organizations and recounting some stories, not only of how the platform was used, but in general, let's say investigations. And then from that, we can learn techniques, best practices, as well as, of course, a bit about the tool. In general, you can follow us on LinkedIn or on our website if you want to find out more about the project and the activities going on. Sometimes we share blog posts from partners discussing different, realities, let's say, such as in the crypto world, tracking, sanctions evasion, so forth. So there's some interesting stuff if you want to follow. For the agenda today, as I said, I'll give a demonstration of the tool and hand it back over to the colleagues from IRPI. At 1, we'll take a lunch break, coming back at 2 and ending at about 4 o'clock, let's say. Hopefully, you got to try and stay on schedule with these things. So I'll share a bit about the tool to give, let's say, an example case. But in terms of journalism, I'll start with that. We have another project that's running in parallel called Next IJ that focuses on training journalists both on DATACROS and another platform that comes from a DATACROS partner, Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project called Aleph. And through online trainings, you can learn a bit about the platform and gain access to start using it in your work. And we also have an Investigathon, which is an event that's going to be hosted in the fall. I don't think the exact dates have been confirmed. We hosted one already where we bring in over 30 early career investigative journalists from across Europe, and effectively they work together in teams to start investigating important topics and get their hands onto the DATACROS and Aleph tools and start learning how to use them in their investigative, let's say, workflow. But beyond that, if you're listening and you come from a public authority or a private entity or civil society organization, please feel free to contact us. With the public authorities in the European Union, access is usually without licensing fees. Of course, there's other associated costs to hosting and so forth, but there is no licensing fee. And we want to get the tool into use and into the right hands. So please feel free to reach out to us. Maybe I'll also write to the email address in the chat so you have it there. And that's all from me. So I'll hand it over to IRPI again to keep going.
Thank you, Michael. I think that in case you have questions, you can write it down in the chat here, and we will take a look, and we will try to get your to provide you answer. So let's move to the next session, and I will talk to you about some of the collaboration that we are doing with at IRPI Media with civil societies for public interest investigation. And one of the aim of this training is trying to provide you with some theoretical approach, let's say, about what is the public interest and what should we look for while we are doing this kind of investigation, and what kind of approach we should take. And I will try to focus on a couple of stories that we did in collaboration with an NGO called, with two NGOs actually, called ActionAid and SOS Méditerranée, about the public money spent to border management in Europe. So I will start with trying to define the area of interest for this session, which is the EU and Italian public funds. And the main question that we are asking usually is, where does the money end up? And I try to summarize three of the main avenues of investigation that we have followed in these years. So the first one is about the externalization of the borders, and that's the main topic of this panel, and it's a process that has been started in 2015 and is actually ongoing. And there are several civic monitoring entities like ActionAid and SOS Méditerranée who are actually trying to understand what is going on, and they are trying to feed up journalists with information coming from freedom of information request or from other sources, and who are teaming up sometimes with journalists trying to do specific investigation. And I will talk to you about a couple of cases. Another big chunk of public money that we tried to investigate was the recovery fund, and for the Italian side, the PNRR, which is the big chunk of money coming into the Italian economy after the COVID pandemic. And in this case, we teamed up with the Good Lobby, which is one of the a civil society NGO that is actually covering transparency and access to information, and grassroots movements for some specific cases. The third chapter of public funds that we try to investigate recently was the agriculture funds, so the European funds for agriculture, and for defense, especially Rearm Europe. In this case, we often teamed up with other media, and sometimes with media activists like fragment, which is a platform that is helping journalists in collecting information from freedom of information request. So I will these are two of the stories. Actually, one is a series of stories that we did on the recovery fund. One is called "The Hand on the Recovery," let's say, and this was a project where we teamed up with the Good Lobby, as I said, and we tried to uncover which companies were the main beneficiaries of the recovery fund, and especially we were trying to understand whether these money were actually impacting on the transition, on the energy transition, and on the green economy. And what we found out is that often the green project tends to help fossil fuel instead of the energy transition. And the allocation of money lacks transparency. This aspect will be one of the key elements that is recurring in all the avenues of investigation that we did about this subject. So the other project was about the paradox of this cable car in Trieste, in Italy, and why this project was relevant. In this case, we use some grassroots movement as first sources of the story, because there were local communities protesting against this project. Why it was interesting and why we make it a national story instead of just a local story, because in this case, initially there were funds coming from the recovery fund, but the project was not providing enough benefit in terms of energy transition. So it was it wasn't classified as one of the potential beneficiary of this money, but still the project was politically relevant, especially for the Lega, and that's why they still have been has been funded as a green project, while there was the recovery fund saying the opposite. And this is the second type. This is the first kind of story that we are doing on public funds. The second, this is the second avenue of investigation, and in this case we have the first story that will be explored much more in detail later on, about beneficiaries of public funds on agriculture that shouldn't be there. This one about Putin's wineries in Tuscany, and the second story is actually much more systematic. We are trying to understand why the public funds for agriculture tends to give benefits to only to big corporation and to big producer without helping the smaller ones. And again, in this case, we were trying to provide these kind of analysis with the aim to explore the inefficiencies in this system of distributing public money, because we know that a very big part of the EU budget is dedicated to this kind of fund. And let's come to the latest part, latest avenue of investigation. This one about the externalization of the border. Outlaw Mediterranean is the latest story that we did on this topic, and we did it with SOS Méditerranée. It was published together with a report about the cost of the externalization of the border and the implication of the externalization of the border. And we started from a very specific case, a shooting suffered by the NGO vessel Ocean Viking on the 24th of August 2025. And in this case, thanks to the collaboration with the SOS Méditerranée, we have been able to verify independently some of the evidences collected by the NGOs during this shooting about the vessel that was shooting at them. And starting from there, and this was the interesting part of the collaboration, we tried to understand where the money for that specific vessel came from, because one fact was sure since the very beginning: the vessel shooting at the NGO was coming from the fleet of the Libyan Coast Guard. The problem was understanding which vessel was and where the money for this vessel come from. And that was basically the main job for us as investigative journalists. But let's make a step behind. Why the externalization of the border, among the other topics, flagged out as one of the most important in the last, I would say, at least 10 years. Because the budget for coming from the EU dedicated for border control boomed in the last decade. Especially the turning point was the 2015 migration crisis. And while initially the money aimed for home affairs and borders were only 1.8 billion, now we are talking about 14 billion. And this is just for home affairs, so just for internal borders. But if you look at let's say the whole the big picture of what is security and border control in Europe, you will find that there are other very important expenses that can be accounted into the same the same group. These are border management, internal security, and broad security scope. What do we mean exactly with this? We're talking about deals with police and border forces of third countries. So exactly the definition of externalization of the borders. We're talking about surveillance system and databases aimed to provide more control on borders. And again, the very important thing to be stressed is that this budget has been has boomed in recent years. And while this the budget for this kind of thing was increased, there were other budgets that were decreased. One was the actual asylum system fund, and the other was what once was the cooperation aid, humanitarian aid, which has the main purpose of fighting poverty. These dynamics has shaped the current situation with the border management in Europe. And given the fact that I'm trying to cover these kind of issues since a while, since at least 2014, I was able to witness these changes, and I tried to use some of the previous work that I did as a sort of theoretical background, at least to understand what was at stake and what kind of issues were there when we are talking about money spent for border management, especially if this money goes towards to forces of a foreign country. And sorry, I forgot to mention before, the shooting happened in international waters, but the country where in front the closest country to this international water was Libya, which is a de facto divided country with only one authority that is recognized by the international community, and this should be the one that is cooperating with EU countries, the European Commission, and other international entities and institutions. So the first investigation that I did were the fact that there were money coming from other, let's say, sector and other chapters of the EU budget funneled into the border management was security for sale. It was a collaborative investigation that I did in 2017 and it was run by The Correspondent. The story was published by Il Fatto Quotidiano, and in that case, the main investigation was identifying that there are very projects from. Sorry, I have some issues with my laptop. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I can't move my cursor at this point, but I will try to talk still. So I was saying that the main result of the investigation was understanding that there are projects that apparently are not aimed for border management, but at the end of the day, they are they are aimed to do research and development of tools that could be used at the borders. It worked with drones. It worked with other vehicles that are controlled remotely. And this was one of the main source of the budget for companies like Leonardo in order to stay in the business. And that was happening 2 years after the biggest migration crisis that reshaped the budgeting of the EU generally. Sorry, I'm trying to come back to my presentation, but I was telling you what lesson learned from the past. So as I was saying, the theoretical background that I personally but together with my colleagues we got from this previous investigation was that first, with security for sale, we saw that there were funds that were actually not counted initially as border management that were still involved in border management with the different aims, so especially for research and development, but still were concurring to the same purpose. And 1 year after, in 2018, we did this investigation called Diverted Aid. It was about the EU-Africa Trust Fund, and the aim was actually trying to understand how money that initially were aimed for humanitarian aid, especially fighting poverty as main target, were put in the same basket of the EU Trust Fund, especially again for border management, which was the main one of the main scope of the project. In this case, we had initially 2.6 million. 2.6 billion from EU funds and another 152 million from member state. At the end of the day, the budget will be roughly 5 billion of euros from 2015 to 2025. So what we were able to understand from internal document of the Commission were the largest EUTF contributors, and we had Germany and Italy as main countries. and which countries were the main beneficiaries. And Sudan, Somalia, and Libya were in the top 3 ranking. But what was not still clear was how this money was spent properly. So when we started to do our money trail investigation, the 3 main areas that we wanted to uncover were, first, the budgeting, the initial budgeting. So how much money publicly were put in a budget for a very broad project like the EU Trust Fund for Africa. Secondly, we look for the commitment. So how much money for specific projects were aimed to be spent. And thirdly, we try to understand the actual outturn, so the money spent for various specific projects. And we did this together with ActionAid. I have already mentioned them. This was the project called The Big Wall. Sorry, it's only in Italian. But we try to understand for which category the money was spent. So root causes, governance, sensibilization, border control, anti-trafficking, protection, returns, and legal ways. We put under scrutiny the EU funds aimed to collaborate with third countries in the environment of migration, and Italian funds aimed for the same reason. And for example, one thing that I can share with you is the money for the EU money for Libya in aim for the root causes, and the results that we have is the main project approved in 2017 and ended in 2019 with this project that is 2 million. We did this at this stage for all the funds aimed for the externalization of the border. So in this case, our main scope was to provide all the people interested in this topic with a monitor tool, and starting from there, we tried to find specific stories to tell. This one was about the money that went to Tunisia in order to support the Tunisian border guard and in order to increase the number of returns to Tunisia, so from European countries to Tunisia. The second story, and this is particularly...
Sorry, Lorenzo, I think we lost the screen share. If you want to share the slides again.
Oops, sorry. Can you see me right now?
Yes, perfect.
Sorry again. So with this second story, we try to investigate for the first time the money that went into the Libyan Coast Guard. And with this specific investigation, we started looking into mill that will be a project particularly important for the latest investigation that we did, the one that I started from about the shooting at the Ocean Viking. So what is relevant in this investigation is the fact that the money coming from Italy and the EU Commission were vital in order to provide a fleet to the Libyan Coast Guard. And again, what we discovered with about the seeped project was that the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, that was one of the pillars of the new form of collaboration between the EU and the Libyan authorities in terms of handling the search and rescue operation, was provided with this specific project. We're not talking about anything illegal at all, just to be clear. Our aim was simply to understand how the money was spent, and for which purpose. And in this case, what is particularly relevant is trying to understand who are the end user of all these equipment. Because what we saw with incident like the one occurred to the Ocean Viking is that sometimes there are groups that can be considered more like militias instead of bodies of a proper Coast Guard. So our aim was trying to understand this kind of thing. So how should I start if I want to do these checks? So if I'm not satisfied with the information that are easily publicly available, I still have to start from what is called action fish, which is the EU documents with the estimated cost of a single project. In this case, the support to integrated border and migration management in Libya, and the acronym is SIBMIL. First phase has the specific code, and this specific code will have to appear also in the Italian document. What is interesting is that the project started in 2017, and initially it was aimed to over after 3 or 4 years. But at the end of the day, because of the volatile situation in Libya, the last equipment were sent to Libya only in November, December 2025. This is particularly important to keep in mind if you want to do this kind of money trail, because again, there is a time gap between the initial proposal of a project and the way it is implemented, especially if a country that is involved is in critical situation with a de facto divided authority as the situation of Libya. And that's particularly important because the claim of the estimated budget and the actual money that are spent can be really, really different. And this will be the case. After the first phase, there was even a second phase with initially 15 million added to the budget. And at the end of the day, there will be another 1.8 million added to this fund. Total, and what we were able to understand at the end of the day was that the budget for the seed mill project was 1.8 million euros. So after this basic math to understand the initial budget, you need to find the single project where this money goes. And in this case, the keywords that you have to find are CIVIL, support integrated border and migration management in Libya second phase, and this code in Italian is called CIG, and it's a unique code that lets identifying a very specific tender. But the problem is that the contractor, the contracting authority for this project are various. So in this case was the Ministry of Interior and the police, but in other cases was the Navy. In other cases was the tax police. In other cases was another authority connected to the Ministry of Defense. So one of the hardest part of this monitoring is trying to understand all of the different contracted authorities that can be involved in providing this money for this project. There are actually, unfortunately, no fixed rules for this, but you just need to try to understand the developments again of the project, because initially, for example, in the seed mill case, we noticed that there were only the Ministry of Interior was involved, only the border police of Italy. But lately, in order to go a bit quicker than before, there were other authorities involved. How to deal with that? Try to Google some of the CIG number of the most important lots of a tender, and this could be phase one. Sometimes it's enough, sometimes not. How to try to double check if you have already traced all the money that was actually spent by the Italian authorities for this project. There is this rotation fund, which has a specific number, 23,211, and it's the community fund for European projects, and all the money that were involved in the seed mill project and actually in the EU Trust Fund projects, in the Italian case were sent initially to this community fund. And this was the only official document we could use as a sort of summary of the expenses and the money that were coming into the Italian pocket aimed for this project. And again, you have to check all the balance sheets that are published every 2 months in order to find whether there are new chunk of funds that are coming in and coming out for this specific project. What we finally got is that we were able to track down the 55% of the funds, but the 55 were not traceable. So we have no documents about whether they have been spent or it has been spent or not. We will try to do some freedom of information requests in order to get more detail about this transparency gap that we noticed. But unfortunately, starting from 2022, there are more restrictive measures for the freedom of information request in Italy, especially if the request regards collaboration with foreign countries, because because what the authorities say usually is that there is the national interest at stake. And what we notice is that whether while we 2 years ago, actually, sorry, 4 years ago, while we did this request for the first time, usually we got positive answer to our freedom of information request. Now, for the latest story that we published last month, we received only denials to our request with this specific caveat that I mentioned earlier. So, as I said, what we find is that the Interior Minister got 30 million, IOM 3 million. The total amount is 34. That means that there are still almost half of the funds that are not traceable for us. I would like to try to show also the way we did the fact checking. So in this case, obviously, one of the main worries is that we missed some of the funds, we missed some of the project, and so we used or we miscalculate something. What we did was trying to use the AI, in this case Notebook LM, in order to help us in checking all the contracting documents that we were able to find. This is the AI generated summary of all the documents for the first phase of seeped. And as you can see, there are elements that are not aligned with our final result, but it's fine. This is just the first phase of the project. But there are at least it's a good way to highlight some of the key project that we got. Just to show you how it appears, this is all the documents that we were able to track down on the different contracting authorities, put in notebook LM. These are just for the first phase, and we ask the AI to help us in understanding whether we had everything. Let me just stop the presentation for 1 second, because I wanted to put up also the our Google Sheet on SIBMIL, because that was actually the previous part of the document. Here we go. So did you see my screen again?
Yeah, we do.
Thank you. Okay. So here is the initial, let's say, handmade document with all the single contracting that we found. So with the competent authorities, that the money aimed for the project, who is the winner of every single tender that was aimed at the end of the day to be provided to the Libyan authorities still, and the year when the tender was when the tender expired. And these are the money for of the Ministry of Interior. These are and these are the ones for IOM, the UN agency that offers shelter and protection to the refugees in Libya, and they were aimed to provide another part of the same SIBMIL project. And we tried to map also the money that they were going to spend. But still, part of the gap is coming also from them, because we know initially that they were aimed to get 12 million for the SIBMIL project, but at the end of the day, they got we were able to trace only 3 million. So let me come back to the presentation. As I show you, this is a sort of summary that we got from Notebook LM. Do you see my screen still, or is it gone?
No, we see it. We see it.
Okay. And this is the same resume for the part 2. Sorry, this was only in Italian, but we got also one in English. But this is again generally for the distribution of the money for project like SIBMIL. So in this case, we have the summary tells us about 30 jeeps like these ones, and 14 ribs vessel that were part of the technical equipment that was among the main chapter of expenses for this project. And we have a summary also of the main criticism by the European Court of Auditors, which published in 2024 a report about the way the money for the EU Trust Fund were spent. And part of these gaps that we were able to track were, I mean, they were highlighted also by the European Courts of Fund. And one of the big issues that they see is how the Libyan authorities can be finally independent in handling their equipment without a constant EU support in terms of money and equipment. So what kind of conclusion we were able to trace thanks to this money trail investigation with the support of SOS Mediterranee in identifying a critical case where this public money was involved. The first conclusion was that we are in front of a case where there could be an infringement of the do not harm principle. This principle is one of the main ones for the all public money, the EU public money, and it says that the public money spent for a project should not provide any harm, neither in terms of damages for the environment nor for human rights violation. And this shooting could be one of these cases. We try to understand whether there was a proper investigation into this potential breach, but we understood that the mechanism in order to spot this kind of violation is still not tested. Let's say is still under construction, and this is happening despite the fact that the money for the EU trust fund has been already spent, the whole budget. So it comes quite late. The other important fact that we have been able to get from this investigation is that as soon as the amount of money spent for the Libyan Coast Guard increased, the search and rescue vessels and the migrants, according to UN agencies, witnessed also more acts of violence at sea. 72 in the latest 5 years, 18, which is a record in 2025. The last point is simply the one that was already expressed by the European Court of Auditors, that is questioning the efficiency of a project like seeped if the constant dependency to the European Union funds will be there forever. And it's not clear how the Libyan authorities will be able to get the same equipment and to maintain this equipment in the future without the European support. This is just one of the cases where you can try to dig into a public interest topic linked to the way that the authorities are spending public money, and with the support of the civil society, you can also find a specific angle, specific element that can be added in order to understand the consequences of this spending, even when it's all legal, completely legal, completely um, completely permitted by the law, even if there are questionable results in the way these money are spent. Thank you. And sorry again for the technical inconvenience that I had during this presentation. If there are no questions, I would leave the floor to Edoardo for the second presentation by ERP Media.
Great, thanks. I was waiting a bit to see if there were any questions, but well, in case you have them, just raise it, and I will pause and let Lorenzo answer. Good morning, everyone. My name is Edoardo Anziano. I'm an investigative reporter at ERP Media, where I focus mostly on organized crime and corruption. And over the past 4 years, I've been covering a bit sanctions evasions under different perspectives, and one in particular has been tracking down assets of sanctioned Russian businessmen in Italy. And this is a bit something I would like to talk to you about in this session. I'll share my screen in the meantime, and you should be able to see it. And also I can start my presentation. But give me maybe a heads up that you can see it, because now I don't see you guys.
Yeah, we do.
Great, thanks. So as I said, in this session, I'd like to cover a bit how to track EU funds, and also and in particular hidden beneficiaries of EU money. This is something that Lorenzo had touched on a bit about. He focused mostly on the lack of transparency. I'd like to try to bring you an example of hidden beneficiaries or not evident beneficiaries who shouldn't benefit or shouldn't receive EU funds. And to do so, I will focus on the case of an investigations that we have done on IRP. We've published on IRP in 2025 in partnership with the Russian media outlet, The Insider. And in short, the story is that 3 Russian oligarchs who were sanctioned for their support to the military economy of the Russian invasion, and who had bought 3 very luxurious vineyards in Tuscany, Italy, had also received EU money through those vineyards even after they were sanctioned, which is of course something that the European Court of Auditors and also national courts of auditors would not allow, because in order to receive EU funds, you should be compliant to a certain number of rules, including, not being sanctioned, because that's a big paradox in itself. EU money going to people whom the EU is trying to freeze their assets, basically. So this is the story in short. This is a Italian specific case, but we'll try to use this as an example to talk about the methods. On the one hand, to track down EU public money, in particular related to agriculture, but this applies to even cohesion funds, for instance. And on the other, we'll try to give some clues on how to track down, opaque corporate structures and hidden beneficiaries, provided that it's in some countries and now all over the European Union, there's no, common registry of ultimate beneficial owners. There are certain jurisdictions who are much more opaque. And also there are some quite common corporate structures that are actively used to hide ultimate beneficiaries. We'll talk a bit about that, like trusts and hidden ads, perhaps. So I believe this. I hope at least this is not going to be too Italian of an example, and I hope it can be applied to all your other countries, given that not every one of you is from Italy. So to track down vineyards that were bought by Russian oligarchs in non-suspicious times, we are talking about 2010, so before sanction came into force, before the invasion of Crimea, we relied on our Russian partner, on our colleague who's a wine expert journalist turned into investigative reporting. So he had already in mind a list of oligarchs who had purchased vineyards in Italy, who had interest in wine production. So together with him, we were able to list down a number of cases who were already of interest to us. But we also wanted to make sure that we were not missing any other potential good case. So this is how we use DATACROS in the first place, not just to track down specific corporate structure, but to get an overview of a phenomenon. Basically, we query DATACROS to extract all the companies who are active in wine production in Tuscany. And then, first of all, we extracted a number of companies, Italian companies, who were owned ultimately by a company based in an opaque jurisdiction in the European Union and abroad, sometimes in like tax havens and stuff like that. So we got, a number of companies owned by societies in Monaco, Hong Kong, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and also like traditional offshore islands like Cayman, Bahamas, Bermuda, etc. And at the same time, we also got a list of all the Italian companies active in wine production who were owned by Russian citizens. Not because that's a crime itself, of course, but because we wanted to make sure we were not missing any potentially interesting case. It turned out that none of this that you can see, it returned, I think, DATACROS returned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 5 different companies that turned out not to be owned or connected to sanctioned Russian oligarchs or even oligarchs in itself, but those were cases that we had not retrieved just simply, searching through open sources and relying on the knowledge of our, wine expert colleague. So in the first place, DATACROS was used to broaden our understanding of the phenomenon, which I think it's a pretty helpful case, other than searching for specific companies. So this is what we did, and this is basically the result. We mapped like more than 900 wineries in Tuscany only, 64 shielded by a foreign company in more or less opaque jurisdiction. A lot were owned by US and Spanish companies, other, as you saw in the slide before, owned by companies registering more, let's say, traditional opaque jurisdiction like Switzerland, for instance. So we narrowed down the number of companies related to publicly known Russian oligarchs to 8. And among those 8, we were able to find 3 who were actually sanctioned. And then we went backward to see what kind of public money those three companies received. And it turned out that between 2015 and 2025, these three Russian oligarchs-owned vineyards received more than €1 million in EU public money. This is not a law in itself, but in some cases, the money, as I said before, were disbursed after these people were sanctioned. And, we are talking about prominent, famous Russian oligarchs. And I think this tells a lot about the level of checks and controls that member states, and in particular Italy, is performing when it comes to this very big grants allocated by the European Union, like agricultural money. This is just to give you an overview. The lighter dots are the wine companies related to oligarchs, which we ended up not mentioning in our piece because there was no clear wrongdoing into that. And the three darker red dots, I think, are actually the three vineyards owned by sanctioned Russian oligarchs. We are talking about Dmitry Medvedev, former Prime Minister of Russia and member of the Security Council, who owned this historical vineyard in not far from Florence. Then Roman Trotsenko, who's oligarch who was sanctioned for his support to the military economy of Russia and who owns a lot of airports around the world. One of the richest men in Russia, who had purchased a vineyard and oil production real estate complex on the coast of Tuscany. It's actually a beautiful real estate complex on the top of a hill in front of the sea. And I see there is a question, so I will pause for a second. Why would Russian oligarch apply for EU funding given the risk of exposure? Was the funding released before the acquisition? So regarding the first question, it's an interesting one. We were not able to figure that out, but our guess, based on reading the balance sheets of this company, is that those luxurious vineyards are not really self-sustainable. It's pretty difficult, and I'm not an expert of agricultural economy at all, but it's difficult to make money out of those luxury vineyards. They're very expensive. The wine that you sell doesn't really pay you back. Oil production is not really profitable at all. So you have to kind of diversify and also rely on, bed and breakfast, weddings, and other kinds of events. But my suspicion is that, these are free money. You have basically no hustle in applying for that. And why not getting, 100,000 euros per year to make up for your losses? I think why not doing that? And regarding the risk of exposure, sure. But as we'll see later, these companies are owned through very different and very complex layers of offshore structure and opaque jurisdiction and trust and whatever, company to make complex to go up the ownership chain. And, public authorities explicitly told us that first, they are not able to see who are the ultimate beneficial owners, especially with this complex structure when they are dealing with checks about EU money, first of all. Second of all, the risk of exposure is minimal, considering that the Italian payment agency is actually not doing basically any check. We are talking about millions of beneficiaries in Italy, and the payment authority told us that they did, over the past few years, they did 365 checks per year, more or less. So we're talking about one check, one control per day. This is the amount of companies that they are actually proactively able to check. So it's virtually, you know, impossible, or the probability of getting caught is so low that the risk of exposure is very low. Was the funding released before their acquisition? I'm not sure to understand what you. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Was the funding released before their acquisition? No, actually, the money were, in some cases they were. I mean, this money were all disbursed after these oligarchs bought the companies, and in some cases even after they were sanctioned. So, you know, these are money that they shouldn't have gotten. This is another interesting question, whether this is actually a reputational investment. You know, I just want to buy nice things like yachts and luxury things, or it's actually useful to launder funds. This is another good question. I don't have an answer. It would be very interesting to do an investigation on that. This is something that with Lorenzo, we kind of had a sense of that. You know, this very luxurious real estate are, you know, not profitable. Why would they buy that? We will see that later. One of the oligarchs poured like 40 million euros into his real estates, which is, you know, a lot of money. We're not be able to figure out why. This is another very good question. Thanks for all of this. If we looked into work conditions, we have not. We have not. As far as I can remember from reading the balance sheets, these companies do not have a lot of employees, first of all, and they're actually, in some cases, not able to sustain production by themselves, meaning that with only the wines field, I don't know how they called, they owned, you know, the plots that they owned for wine and oil production are not big enough to actually produce, and so they are like renting out other vineyards plots, and I'm suspecting that they're also, you know, employing a lot of temporary workers, but we have not looked into that. In terms of like labor exploitation, if that's what you mean, we haven't actually. What tool did you use to build the list of offshore-based companies? Thanks. Yeah, I'll go back to my presentation if I can. Yes, you should be able to see that. If not, just tell me. So you mean for this, we use DATACROS. So the DATACROS tool, it's not just able, as Michael showed you at the beginning, it's not just able to pull out, you know, diagrams of ownership structures of specific companies that you search for. It's also able to query, you know, bulk or to search for bulk queries. In this case, we query DATACROS telling them, I only want wine production companies register in this region, and then from there we filter down, you know, nationality of the owner and also ultimate beneficial owning company register in country XYZ. So this is how we pull out the list of the offshore company. Yeah, no, thanks for the questions, and please just keep asking if you have more. That way is a bit more interactive, and it's also difficult not seeing you guys. So just, you know, please feel free to interrupt me. Again, so just checking the time. Okay. So I want to focus on the case of La Madonnina, which, as you on the map, is this last one that I didn't mention, owned by Konstantin Nikolaev, or actually bought, better said, by Konstantin Nikolaev at the early 2010. It's a beautiful place. It's in, you know, on the coast of Tuscany. It has a villa with 29 rooms, which is like 1,000 square meters, and also has, you know, 70 hectares of wine and olive trees. It's a very guarded place, very discreet, so it's perfect if you want to, you know, stay there without not being noticed. Konstantin Nikolaev bought this, and this was publicly known in the, as I said, early 2010. He he was sanctioned in 2025. I think it was May 2025. There he is. For investing heavily in a military complex, ammunition and weapons production factories that are directly supplying Russian security services. He's also been, investing in mercenary groups fighting for Russia in Ukraine. So in May 2025, he was sanctioned. Up to 2025, he received hundreds of thousands of euros in two EU agricultural support funds. And Lorenzo had already talked a bit about that and how the EU is allocating different sort of support schemes for funds. So I'm not going to go deeper into that unless you have more questions. But basically, the type of fundings that these oligarchs owned wineries received are of two types. The first is Common Agricultural Policy, CAP. It's basically a two-pillar support scheme in theory, for small farmers. It's actually not going to small farmers at all. It's actually benefiting, rich people and big agricultural multinationals, but we're not going that route. And the other support scheme for farmers is the Next Generation EU, also called, as Michael mentioned before, Recovery and Resilience Fund. Italy, I think, got the biggest chunk of it. It was after COVID. We got like 200 and some more billion actually euros. Among the pillars that the Next Generation EU was allocating, there was a support fund for farmers who were actually adding solar panels to their buildings in the farms. So La Madonnina applied and received money after Nikolaev was sanctioned to this support scheme for putting solar panels and to, I guess, make your farm more sustainable in terms of energy production. As you can see on the slide, parts of the fund were disbursed after the sanctions came into force, and various bodies like the Italian Courts of Editor explicitly told us that companies ultimately controlled by sanctioned subjects cannot receive EU funds. This is kind of obvious, you would think, but it's actually very difficult to understand that sort of legislation that is behind that. There's no explicit rule saying, if you're sanctioned, you shouldn't receive EU money. There are some broader regulations saying that you shouldn't receive EU funds, or actually, better said, if you receive EU funds, you have to make sure that you comply and oblige to all the European Union's aims and scopes. But this is very broad, So we had to seek confirmation that, actually that would be a crime, that would be a loss for the public coffers if a sanctioned person by the European Union would actually receive EU funds. We were able to confirm that thanks to these various actors that are in charge in Italy, but also in every other European member state to oversee the allocation of this money. We didn't receive any a comment or clarification by law enforcement authorities, which I think it's interesting in itself. We would have liked to have that perspective as well. I told you about Nikolaev. What is actually very interesting is that he doesn't hide his his ownership, or at least his interest, his passion, he says, in La Madonnina. On the website of the wine consortium that La Madonnina is part of, you can see Nikolaev in this picture, and he says that he bought it in 2014, and he's very passionate about making wine in Tuscany because it's a unique territory and whatever. So he doesn't hide that per se. There are still, I didn't put this in the slide, but there are YouTube videos where he walks around. He walks around in La Madonnina, and he tells about, you know, how great is make wine there. I see there's a question. Hold on. I must have missed something, but I've not grasped how you connected wineries. Yes, I'm going to talk about that. This is going to be the second part of the presentation. I was still just, you know, talking about the specific case, and then we'll get into that, how to track down these hidden beneficiaries. Your workflow for collaborative investigations. Perhaps thanks for the question. Yeah. Perhaps I can note it down, and we can talk about that at the end, you know, more broader questions about the workflow, and like, you know, using a master file and etc. Yes, thanks. I'll pick that up at the end if that's okay. So you should be able to see this, right? Yes. Sorry, back. Okay. So yeah, Nikolaev doesn't hide that at all, but he doesn't appear in the ownership structure at all. So you know, we'll try to understand how we track him down. Before that, just a quick overview, and I'm sorry if, you know, this is something that you already know, but I assume that some of you might not know. So I'll talk a bit about tracking down EU funds in general, using the case of La Madonnina as an example. And again, I know that this is related to Italy per se, but I believe it applies to every other member states and beyond. So hopefully you'll find that interesting for your own, you know, work and investigations. Starting point for instance, for the Common Agricultural Policy, there are websites who are aggregating historical data. This is the case of Farm City. You can request access for free. It's managed by Fragment, the German NGO that Lorenzo was mentioning before. Why it's important that they maintain historical data? Because, you know, national and regional payment agencies, for privacy reasons, only disclose the latest 2 years beneficiaries. In this case, you know, thanks to a lot of freedom of information requests that these people have sent over the past two decades, basically, you can find data dating back to, you know, the early 2000, like 2005 or 8 and something like that. So in this case, we tracked down La Madonnina. We saw that they received some little money in 2018, but it's good to have historical data. It's also good, as I said, to have the most recent data, and this can be done going through to the National Payment Agency portal. In some countries, you have to request that with the Freedom of Information Act. I think that's the case, for instance, in Slovakia. You have to actually actively send them a request. Italy, for example, maintains from not a long ago a public portal that you can find where you can find the two pillars of the Common Agricultural Policy: the national one, which is the Guarantee Fund, and the rural development, which is the regional one. But again, I won't go into details about those unless you're interested. On national portals, you can find, you know, beneficiaries for the latest 2-3 years. You can, you know, enter the company name, and they'll pull out an Excel file with the beneficiaries. That's how we found La Madonnina and the other sanctioned or not sanctioned wineries, but wineries owned by sanctioned oligarchs. But, you know, we also wanted to make sure we were not missing things, and also we wanted to understand what specific project they were receiving money for. Because, for instance, with the regional pillar of the Common Agricultural Policy, sometimes the money can be allocated for specific projects. For instance, for supporting organic wine, let's say. So we also performed a few Google Advanced search with some operators that you can see on top of the screen, like site and file type, to make sure we were not missing any list where this company would appear, because sometimes, as this is the case, the regional body publishes these huge PDF files with the specific measures and specific figures of the money allocated. So that can be helpful. For the Recovery and Resilience Fund, instead, we relied on a combination of this sort of Google dorking and some open data. So we tracked down the VAT number of La Madonnina, and we tried to see if it was ever published on any government website using the in URL operator as a PDF or as an Excel file, and the reason why we would use the VAT numbers is that sometimes the name is spelled a little funny. Like you can see in this open source, open data about the Recovery and Resilience Fund, La Madonnina Società Agricola, which means agricultural company, is spelled with a question mark instead of the A with an accent. So sometimes you might miss those things, and that's why we combined VAT numbers and also the name of the companies, and also we once we figured out that La Madonnina had won a grant by the Ministry of Agriculture for the Recovery and Resilience Fund to build these solar panels on the rooftops, we went to the open data and actually pulled out the profile of the company and the actual measure that they were applying to, how much money they get. In this case is like 37,000 euros. Interestingly enough, doing this, we noticed that this address of the company was at an accountant firm who's actually handling everything for La Madonnina. It's not their actual place where they produce the wine. So they are registered at an accountant firm. So we thought, okay, interesting. And the reason why we figured it out is because I was trying to look at the solar panels from a satellite on Google Earth, and I could only see this, building in the city center of Florence, and no vineyards around. So I thought, oh, that's strange. Turned out to be an accountant firm, and the reason why it's interesting is that the same accountant registered there, it's also registered for Torre Civette, which is the other company owned by Trotsenko. So reviewing the list of companies registered at that address in Florence, we found out Trotsenko, basically. So I think that might be interesting, checking for address. I know it's pretty obvious, but it was, in this case, was very helpful. So getting into the more juicy part, I hope, tracking down ultimate beneficial owners. And again, if you have questions or doubts about this first part about agricultural fund, please just ask. So some of you have asked rightfully how we track down, how we connected Nikolaev to La Madonnina. Aside from the fact that we knew that he publicly sort of bragged about how great it was to make wine there. So the first thing is that we pull out their corporate structure. We did this using Sayari, which is a paid tool. I don't remember if at the time DATACROS had the integration with offshore leaks, but you could do this as well with DATACROS, actually combining it with offshore leaks at the same time in the same portal, let's say, and you'll understand why that would be important. Anyway, we did that with Sayari. It's a paid tool. It's very expensive, but it works pretty well in terms of pulling out these corporate networks. What we figured out is that it had an Italian legal representative which is the guy that you see here. I hope you can see my cursor on the right. But the structure itself, it's not so complex. There are two companies. 100% of the shares are owned by this Cetrezza Trading, which is a Cyprus-based limited company, which in turn is owned by Cedar Circle Holdings Limited, which is a BVI, British Virgin Island company. So no way to know who's the owner there. Fair enough. Broadening it up, the company structure, we found something interesting. If you see the structure on the right. Okay, sorry. If you see the structure on the right, you see that Cetrezza, so the holding that owns La Madonnina and based in Cyprus, also owns 85% of the shares in this wine restaurant based not far from La Madonnina. It's called Enoteca Tognoni. You see that in the center of the sorry, trying to sorry. Okay. I needed my cursor so I can show you where I'm pointing. You see in the center of this second company structure, you see that there is this wine restaurant, which is also owned by the same company that owns La Madonnina, is basically registered in the same city in Tuscany. And interestingly enough, the former shareholder was Nikolaev himself in person. But, that doesn't tell us anything. Still, it's just a bunch of leads. What we did was turning to offshore leaks, which again, if you have access to DATACROS, you could expand this graph here directly with DATACROS, pulling out information from offshore leaks. In this case, we figured out that Cedar Circle was owned, the ultimate beneficial owner of Cedar Circle, thanks to the leaks that have been released to ICIG over the past 10 years or so, is actually Nikolaev. Good enough, except that this structure doesn't apply anymore. This is an old structure. It's not updated even in Sayari. So things are not like this anymore. The structure has changed, and it has changed fairly recently for good reasons, I think. So how would we go further? Another thing that we did was, looking at the balance sheet. And, of course, we couldn't access the balance sheet of Cedar Circle because it's in the BVI. I don't know if you can access that in Cyprus. Perhaps now, yes, but I don't know how much information you would get. I'm not sure if you would get the full balance sheet and for what years. I'm not sure about that. But we looked at the Italian balance sheet, so the balance sheet for La Madonnina Limited Company in Italy. And for some reason, at the end of the balance sheet, which showed nothing interesting apart from the fact that the company is not really profitable, they also attached the balance sheet for the Cyprus company. And reading through it, we found out some interesting things. First of all, in their director's report, they wrote down something that it's quite funny, I think. It's explicitly underlined that the company has no connection to Russia. So it doesn't expect any impact from the global crisis related to the war. I thought was interesting in itself. Then, in the notes to the financial statements, we basically find the subsidiaries of the Cyprus company, and we figured out that the shares of La Madonnina were valued 39 million euros, although the capital of La Madonnina is not like that high, but again the the participation of the Cyprus company in La Madonnina was valued 39 million, or actually 40 million, basically. They also did some related parties transaction, which is always a good thing to check when you're looking at balance sheets, because you might find, you know, interesting transactions between other parties. In this case, it wasn't that interesting. There was just a transaction with La Madonnina, which we already knew that was related to this Cyprus company. But they told us something that didn't show up in the corporate structure, which is that the company is owned by this Tenuta GmbH company, which is registered in Switzerland, as a trustee of this Magic Forest Trust. So someone had changed the company structure from, you know, a Cyprus holding owned by some company based in the BVI, which was leaked in the offshore leaks, so that was not a secret anymore, to something perhaps even more secretive. I think I'm not so expert on that, but I guess could be more secretive, like a trust owned by a Swiss company. So no actual way to see who's the ultimate beneficial owner at all. So at the end, we're not actually able to have a document that would tell us that the UBO of La Madonnina is still Konstantin Nikolaev, who had bought it in the first place. But, you know, there was no news of La Madonnina being sold or being bought by someone else, first of all. And second, we actually found out that their declared UBO was someone else. And to do so, we actually sent a Freedom of Information request to the payment company that disbursed the Recovery and Resilience Fund. If you remember this one. So we sent a Freedom of Information request asking to this body all the documents that were filed in application to this for this measure. Okay, so La Madonnina, to receive this 37,000 euros, sent a bunch of documents to this body, and the documents were checked, and they say, okay, good, we're gonna give you the money. So we asked for all those documents. A bunch of them were like useless, you know, projects of like where to put these solar panels and stuff like that. But one document was interesting, and it was this one, you know. So they basically declared in a public document and stating that they were aware of the sanctions that, you know, are in this case in place if you state something false, that the ultimate beneficial owner is their legal representative, and it owns 100% of the shares, which raise some questions, legitimate question of use of public money, I think, because the UBO is the legal representative who is a chef. You see him here, you know, is a chef who also was the minority shareholder in the wine restaurant company. And he's not very well known. He's actually pretty unknown. And, you know, the legitimate question is, if the investment carried out in La Madonnina by the Cyprus company was 40 million euros as of 2023, you know, we can assume that he put all those money in the company. So, you know, that's a legitimate question. And again, to the public authorities who you know, give out the money, have they checked if this is actually true? Have they checked if he is actually 100% owner of all the shares of the company is actually requesting the money? And if yes, why would there be a need to hide that under such a complex layer of companies, and actually changing that after you know, the scrutiny on Russian subjects increased because of the sanctions? I think this remain as pretty fairly legitimate questions, I think. Of course, we didn't get any response, nor from the payment body, nor from law enforcement authorities, nor from, you know, the people and the companies we are mentioning. So not from Nikolaev, not from the guy who's actually declared as the beneficial owner, not from the company itself. So I think that's pretty much it. I'm wondering if there's any questions so far. If not, I can answer the one that was sent about the workflow. But feel free to type in any other question. We ended up a few minutes earlier, so there is definitely time for that. So regarding the workflow and tools, yes, we unless the investigation is super sensitive, we normally use Google Docs and Google Drive because it's very handy and easy to collaborate on. We do have a master file, and in this specific case, it was just that we put all the information in a master file. The more we proceed, gathering stuff. So regular collaborative workflow. We used regular things like Signal for communicating securely. I think there was no special security requirement or specific things that we've done more carefully than other investigations. I think the safety, the risk assessment was fairly low in this case. Regarding tools for collaborative investigations, we tend to use OCCRP Aleph a lot. It's Aleph at occrp.org. I'll put it in the chat. It's very useful to search through other leaks and public information. It's also very useful if you want to upload your own documents and you want to make them searchable. That's useful, and you can share those collections of documents with other people, and that's much more secure than using Google Drive because it runs entirely on OCCRP servers. Regarding AI tools, so in this case, balance sheets are very complex and hard to read, and of course I've read them firsthand, but to make sure I wasn't missing something, I put them on Notebook LM and I let them do like a financial analysis to make sure I wasn't missing any weak spot or figure that was odd, because I'm not a financial, or I'm not an accountant or a forensic financial expert. So Notebook LM turned out to do the job pretty well in terms of like analyzing financial documents. Let me think, other tools that we might have used. Lorenzo, if you have any suggestion or things, just step in. Yeah, Freedom of Information Acts I mentioned, DATACROS I mentioned. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And other tools.
I don't remember if we asked our colleague in Russia to double check on Russian corporate data and customs data. Do you remember whether
I
we did it?
I think we use something called EU control for Russia,
Yeah.
for Russian, so to make sure that we weren't missing any any connection between sanctioned people and companies. I can put the link in the chat. They also,
Yeah, I will put it.
okay,
I will put it.
thanks.
For you.
It's called U-Control, and it's sort of a Sayari, but it specifically relies on Russian and Ukrainian sources. They have their own risk factors, so sometimes they're more comprehensive for dealing with this kind of topics. So
and it flags out PEPs, politically exposed persons, quite easily, usually, and this is one of the reasons why it is used quite often, even by our colleagues in Ukraine, on Russian journalists in exile.
And I think also, I mean, in this specific case, EU-control didn't turn out to be more comprehensive than another, you know, just because there was no other connection other than those that I showed you. So Cyprus, BVI, and then from the balance sheet we pulled out the Swiss connection, basically. How do you define an opaque jurisdiction? Oof, that's a good question. I think FAFT or GAFI is pretty good to evaluate the level of so F.
To add on this, I just put in the chat the financial secrecy index by Tax Justice Network. That is another tool by the civil society that can be good in trying to understand what kind of weaknesses in terms of transparency you can find all over the world in different jurisdictions.
Yeah, and if there's no other question, then thanks a lot. And I had a slide with my email, but I'll put it here as well. If you want to reach out, just, you know, feel free to do that.
Thanks, Eduardo. I will leave the floor to Fabio, who will be talking about greenwashing and green finance for the last section before the lunch break. Thanks, Fabio.
Okay, so can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, okay. And us to, okay, perfect. That's perfect. So yeah, we're going to talk about, I mean, the green finance, especially when it came to creation in a sense in 2018, 2019. And it was pushed by, you know, the Paris agreements and like to the efforts in a sense to try to, you know, towards the more sustainable development goals and all these kind of like green transition activities. And if you can change the slide, please. And thanks again for the support, because I still like didn't work out about my laptop issues. Okay, so yeah. So first thing first, there was this thought of like increase the profits and at the same time save the world, basically. Because the thought behind this was, okay, we need to transit towards a more greener economy. So how can we do so? Both with a public funds, of course, like the public sector financing and pushing like for a greener development, but at the same time, they rely in the EU, they realized that it will also need a more private approach as well. So private sector and so the private finance as well. And in order to do so, they try to regulate the finance and make it more sustainable by bringing like the two main rules in a sense, the EU taxonomy and the sustainable finance disclosure regulations. So the first one is basically a set or a list of activities that the EU deemed as sustainable and on which investment companies could actually invest and still claim to be in a sense sustainable or to promote sustainable development. The SFDR, so the Sustainable Financial Disclosure Regulation, was more like the set of tools and a set of regulations that were provided by the EU in order to navigate through the what was to be considered a sustainable investment and whatnot. And so this so the SFDR was basically based on three main pillars. So the environment, society, and governance, which then we will find the acronym ESG. It's basically where like the overall impact that both the investment companies as well as the companies on which the investment funds could invest on had to disclose in order to have a proper understanding of what companies, what agencies were more striving towards a more sustainable activities of their specific sector, be it like, I don't know, extractive or textile or any sort of activities. So going to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in order to do so, the European Commission thought about three main categories, or at first what some experts suggested also to be as labels. So three kind of articles, Articles 6, 8, and 9, which were to compose the overall markets of the investment funds. And basically were these different shades of colors according like to the level of sustainability. So article number 6 would be like all the investment funds that would just like not strive for a sustainable development, basically, or sustainable activities, but just like go for the classic, let's say, I don't know, what was before like arms industry or fossil fuel, or what you might think, I don't know, also as aviation, for instance. Article 8 and 9 were supposed to be like the ones, the labels under which investment funds could stand out as being more like a green, to have a green approach to the finance. And Article 8 was mostly just to, as it says here, like just to promote an ESG impact to the companies in which it invests on. Whereas the Article 9, funds Article 9 were not just required to, promote in general terms like the sustainable developments of specific companies on which they invest, but also like to actively specify what were like the plans for the funds in order to achieve this kind of change and this kind of transition to a greener development of the different companies. And if you could change the slide, please, Michael. Thank you. So at first, everything's like seemed pretty great. I mean, there's like categories and everything, but once that we in our first investigation, we did together also with coordinated with Follow the Money and Investico, and also thanks to their database that they provided us, we had an analysis of most of the European funds that were claiming to be like either Article 8 or Article 9, so either striving to acquire more like sustainable developments of or economic transition, or towards the economic transition of a greener economy, or like proper plans in order to achieve this green transition. What we found out was that almost half of the funds, be like from Article 8 or Article 9, were actually investing still in fossil fuel companies such as, I don't know, Eni, ExxonMobil, and so on, as well as aviation companies. So one of the most polluting ones of the, for the environment. And so what we found out was not just was a mix of different loopholes and a sense of looseness in a sense of the European regulation, because on one side, the aim of the investment sector was still like to make profit out of it, but still retain a part of the market, which was increasingly going towards more the green finance. Because in 2021, when this DSFDR came into place, there were almost 40% of the overall market in the EU was already labeled as more like sustainable finance, and so Article 8 or Article 9. And the overall of that, half of it was still investing in fossil fuel or other, let's say, not so green companies. And how was it possible? It was possible because as you also mentioned, like the European Commission, and if you could move on to the next slide. As you move on, and this is also like one of the main confusion there was also for some experts. As I told you before, like some experts said that this new SFDR was some kind of like labeling of different funds. But what the European Commission later said, also like when asked about like this about this, said it was not a labeling activity, but most like a disclosure, basically. So, and something that single investment companies would do in order to be under more like an Article 8 rather than an Article 9 of the green finance. And so this was one of the big issues, in a sense that we realized that there were no stricter criteria or like no specific points under which both a private investor or like a investment companies, or sometimes also like the companies on which the investment funds would invest on, that could better categorize how do you define yourself, how do you define the funds that you want to invest on? Because basically there were like no percentages of required to be described as Article 8 or Article 9. So you could have also like just a 1% or 2% of investments in some in a, say, a green company and still be labeled as Article 8 or Article 9. And so this was one of the main issue that we found in our first investigation. And there were also like different approaches, like different, how do you say, different points that the European Commission made in order like to try to adjust and not make it too loose as a concept of like what sustainable finance is, such as with the principle of do not harm to the energy transition and to the green transition. So, for instance, if a company would harm anyway one of the ESG pillars, so either the environment, the society, or the governance, then it would have a negative points in a sense on the green scale. But as we also found, like for instance, if we analyze the three pillars, so the environment, the society, and the governance, environment be like, so the CO2 emission, for instance, the society be more like, well, I don't know, the condition of the workers, for instance, as well as the governance, for instance, the anti-corruption practices. If one of these three pillars were to report some issues, then it would have been possible, in a sense, to address the specific issues and like see whether a company was actually a Article 8, Article 9 on what level. But since there were no actual levels or no actual categories, everything seemed more blurred in a sense. And so everything was sort of, it was in a sense made still not, how do you say, not properly regulated anyway. And if you could change the slide, please. So then in 2023 and 2024, the European Security and Market Authority tried to impose a stricter regulation on the investment funds, on the asset managers, and on the companies that were supposed to to provide also a reporting activities about their activity in order to be then, in order for the investment funds to be clear whether or not you could invest on this specific company if you had like specific, I don't know, if it had like specific activities that were harm or not one of the three pillars of the SFDR, so one of the three pillars of the ESG. But still, what we found was that like there were still there was not the case, because there were still some suggestions made by the ESMA, but there were no mandatory regulations made in 2023. So still the things remained really loose. And one thing that actually could have been quite good in a sense, it was one thing where also the experts that we interviewed were most excited about, like most hopeful about, was two specific regulations or directive. And if you could change slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So one was the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and another one was the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So the first one was supposed to be a reporting activities that had to be made by both the investment funds as well as the companies, so fossil fuel companies or whatever companies, in order to get a more transparent approach to the sustainable finance, in order to properly report what were the activities that the fund as well as the companies were doing in order to be categorized as more sustainable or not, or what was their approach to sustainable finance and to sustainability in general. And the second one, so the CSDD, which was actually one of the most ambitious directive. At first, it was meant to be a controlling system, especially for the companies on which the investment funds could invest on. And at first, it was meant to be the directive under which especially the S of the ESG, so the society part, was mostly covered, in which you could actually ask to each company to provide a detailed overview of the due diligence that they were making in order to set the record straight and see that all the chain of production. So if I'm not, I don't know if I'm a textile industry, where do you get the primary resources? Where do you get like the workforce? Is it like subcontracted by another company in another country? How are they treating the workers over there? Are they treating in a good and dignified manners? Are they paid, underpaid? And all these sort of things was part to be the due diligence activities that was meant to be mandatory for the companies. But in one of the latest simplification activities that the EU Commission made, what was done was basically a reduction of the limits imposed on the companies. And so, for instance, about the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, it was downgraded basically. So there were no more the need for every company to, for instance, reporting their sustainable activities, but it was made just for the biggest companies. So companies of more than 1,000 employees for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and like more than 500 employees for the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which is saying, okay, any as itself, for instance, might be requested to provide for a due diligence, but just for the primary suppliers. So there's no anymore like a whole chain of production that is under control, but just like the first row of the chain of productions. And so would actually what it meant was like to completely like decrease the kind of control and the kind of also transparency that society would have when disclosing their financial asset, their sustainable goals, and so like how would it be treated also on the sustainable finance market. I know that this might be like kind of maybe a bit complicated as a topic, especially because it's like the last panel before lunch. So if you've got any questions, or if you're still like a bit lost in it, just let me know. I'll try to answer like as clear as possible on the questions. And otherwise, we can move on also like to the next slide, and which is kind of connected also like to the simplification, because in this simplification made by the EU in 2024 and 2025, also known as the Omnibus package, there was one package, the Defense Omnibus package, in which not only there were all these limitations as we just said, but it was also like another step back again on the economic transition, on the economic green transition, which was basically to declare that the defense sector was to be sustainable. So it would be included in the European taxonomy, so all the list of the activities that was considered to be sustainable. Already in 2022, there was some confusion, not some confusion, but more like some perplextions as to why the gas and nuclear energies were to be sustainable, especially considering the fact that now the chain of production and the due diligence was not anymore supposed to be mandatory, and so you couldn't grant whether, I don't know, a power plant in, I don't know, in France could have been supplied by uranium by, I don't know, some underpaid or nearly to slavery workers in, say, Niger, for instance. And so now the defense industry in 2025 became another green activities, and this was mainly justified by saying, look, Europe is striving towards a more sustainable development and to a greener transition, but in order to do so, we need our democracy, we need our form of life, in a sense. And in order to do so, since we are threatened by, I don't know, the war in Russia or other threats, we need the defense industry to protect us, basically. And so there was the case, basically, under which the defense industry and defense sector became sustainable. And it was also made clear by the European Commission when, as you can see there, they said there is like no conflict between investment in the defense sector and the regulatory framework for sustainability. And so in our second investigation, and if you could change the slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, in our second investigation, we found that we made a comparison between the 2021, so when there was the first SFDR regulation was implemented, and 2025, and we found that basically there was an increase, a really drastic increase of fundings to the defense sector. And defense sector would be also like, I don't know, Elbit System, for instance, or Leonardo, all these activities that were, all these companies that were actively supporting ongoing conflicts. And so we found out that, for instance, if in 2021, for instance, in Italy, there were kind of 500 millions in investing in defense sector. In 2025, they were tripled, basically. And all this because it was the defense sector was deemed to be sustainable. So, and if you see the difference here, but whether in the first investigation that we made, there was an uncertainty between the Article 8, Article 9, what categories could be considered as sustainable and what not. This was more like an, let's say, like under the sun activities, in a sense of you could really just invest in sustainable, declare to be sustainable in with your investment funds, and still be investing in arms companies that were active in different conflicts, be it like Ukraine, Gaza, and so on. And so, and for instance, for the Italian side, we try to look at specific investment funds such as the Horizon SGR, which is one of the main investment activities of the Intesa Sanpaolo, so a bank in Italy. And we found that in the portfolio, which is like the what the agencies, what the companies and investment funds say are the disclosed when disclose their main investments activities. we could see that Leonardo, especially Leonardo, was one of the main companies under which that received several financial investments. Leonardo in particular was kind of like a very good example, because if in 2021 it received I think more or less something like 60 or 70 millions in green investments. In the 2025, in the first semester of 2025, received something like almost 800 millions of green investments. And this was also framed in a way by the European Commission by saying, look, it's not that it matters let's say the chain of production, but it's mostly considering what the European Commission was mostly considering the direct impact on the ESG just by the main company, which is Leonardo. So for instance, if I pay all my workers well, and if I say, and maybe I do also that, I don't know, I reduce the CO2 emissions of my plants of productions and everything, then I can still be considered a green company to invest on. Because what also the European Commission did in a political way, in a sense, was to detach the production from the product. And so, and there's also still a debate going on. And so that's also why there's a new SFDR, which still is being discussed. But what basically was the thought behind it was that the product is not, once it is made, it's not anymore the responsibility of the production company, but more of the people, the state that uses it, which is, I don't know. Yeah, it's a way of thought, and it's still being discussed anyway. And so like there's also like several aspects that's been discussing it. What we know for sure is that now there's more a sort of deregulation on the there's no more limits to the amount of spending, investment that a company, investment company could do on the defense sector. So if you could just change slide. Thank you. So you can see here an example of a company that is based in Ireland and is classified as Article 8. So like still light green, but still like kind of promoting ESG values. And as you can see on the table on the right, you can see that all the main investments made, so like the weight on the funds would be like 5.5% and so on. are just like defense companies, and this is just one of the main example, because this is like ANEFT, which is one of the companies that was actually one of the pioneer of the defense investments funds, and it's kind of claims is kind of interesting to see, because from the beginning this company what do you say, it just like claimed, we kind of like proudly in a sense to be like one of the first companies that could invest in defense companies and still be green. So if you're a private investor looking like to make profit and at the same time feel as you're still kind of supporting the green transition, there was like the main their service was like one of the most valuable apparently. And so there's this how do you say, so there's like this kind of like sense of there's a strange feeling in a sense when discussing about like this, because you see like basically now at least what we try to explain, especially in the second investigation about the arms industry and the sustainable finance, was the financiarization of war, and basically how now, since the defense sector was was deemed to be sustainable, all the energies in order of investment could be directed towards the defense sector. And so it created also some kind of a loop under which the more you finance the defense sector, the more it means it is an expansion market. And so the more you can invest on, because it gives more profits. But it gives more profits. It also means that as a private investor, you are investing on the war, basically. And there are, I don't know if you read it, but there were like several cases in which, for instance, if there were talks of peace, for instance, in Ukraine or in Gaza or in any other major conflict regarding also like the European, that would also impact on the European market. The values of defense companies, be like Leonardo and all sort of things, would just really go down quite quickly. I don't know, passing from like 50 euros per action to, I don't know, 35 sometimes. And this tells a lot about like what is the political plan of Europe, and what is the let's say not political goal, but like the image that European Central wants to give to about the future. So it's a future about work, because if you have to invest on something that will grow, because of course you want your profit to grow, and you invest on work, you mean like you want the work to grow, you want the work to expand even more in order to get your profits higher. And so there was this this kind of like thing that kind of struck them also with some experts that we found. And so basically these were the two main investigation that we made on the green finance and sustainable finance. And to do so, we mostly use some database that were provided by us in this case, Follow the Money, or in some other database, especially on Morningstar. And and apart from these databases, which in a sense grant you an overall viewing of all the different investment funds in Europe that could be labeled as 8 or 9. One thing that one could do is also like to try to go deeper and look for the single investment companies, or like, I don't know, banks or other investment companies or asset managers, and try to see what do they publish, what do they disclose, and the amount of information that are disclosed. So, for instance, in this case of this company here, it was quite open, of course, to disclose that all companies in which it invests on are just defense industries. But sometimes it's not so clear, and so companies by law are required to disclose at least the first 10 voices of their portfolio. So the first 10 big investment that they do in their portfolio. Sometimes they get more transparent. Sometimes they just stick to the first 10. So sometimes it's interesting also like to, if you want to go more into the specific of it and see, so if there is like a pitfall or another, something that doesn't adds up, you could also try to verify not just with the portfolio, like the overall, the overview they could also find for each investment company in some database such as Morningstar, for instance. But you could also try to go to the annual or semester reports of each company, or sometimes of each fund, and see how do they categorize themselves, on what base do they categorize themselves, and see, let's say the gray areas around it. Not so much for the defense sector, because I mean, for the defense sector, the main limitation is just like not to invest in companies that produce controversial weapons, be like cluster bombs, anti-personnel mines, and these sort of things. But apart from that, everything is granted. And then there's just like the it is up to the sensitivity of each investment fund and investment company to say which company I would like to invest on and which not. And this is also another case, another fact that is kind of interesting, also like to try to analyze how people trying to really push for a greener transition, try to really their best to just invest on these specific companies that actually provide a full disclosure of their activity, of their financial activities, as well as the financial and sustainable activities. And these actors that, in a sense, try to believe really in the green finance are the ones sometimes struggling the most, because of course they want to in a sense provide some profits for their for the clients, but at the same time they want to do it in a more ethic way. And so there's also what it stands out from these investigations are like the difference between three sort of finances: the classic finance, the sustainable finance, and the ethic finance. So the first one is, as we probably understand it as being more like just profit driven and just basic out of make the most money out of each investment. Whereas sustainable finance was at first thought to be something a tool for a green transition, but it ended up being, at least for the European Union and the regulation provided by the European Union, just a sort of another tool to claim to be sustainable, while at the same time making profits also of the most the most profitable companies, so the arms industry and so on. Whereas the ethical finance was supposed to be what just some private actors are really trying to do. So in a sense, try to divest really on each and every company that doesn't fully embrace the sustainable developments and doesn't really strive to achieve a zero impact, in a sense, on the ESG pillars. So something that, I don't know, maybe it could be useful also like for further investigations, apart from, checking all the prospects and portfolios and whatever, sometimes could be also some cases of revolving doors, especially for the defense sector, since we saw, for instance, also about the company that we are mentioning here, the HANEFT, that some of the board members of the company were previously coming from some positions, be like board members or like managerial activities in some of the biggest defense sector companies, be like Saab, for instance, or sometimes also Elbit System. So there's also like an interesting case of, in a sense of revolving doors. And so, yeah, that's basically it for the, let's say, for the presentation. And yeah, sorry, I didn't ask you anymore for the slides, so I was just going on like this. And yeah, I don't know, feel free to ask any questions, or I don't know, also like share my email if you got any further question going on. If not, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Fabio. We are 10 minutes ahead of schedule. So whoever has a question, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, Michael, what do you think? Shall we take a break right now and we'll reconvene?
Yeah, I think so. It's always good to be ahead of schedule. So we'll come back at 2 o'clock. Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Fantastic. See you later.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks all. I'm sorry I missed the first part of this training today, so I don't know if I need to catch up with anything, or if you want to tell me any special need from the audience or things like that, or shall I just proceed?
I think you can proceed.
Okay, sure. So I'm happy to answer questions also in the during my presentation. So if you, I mean, of course, if you want to write anything, I think it's going to be in the main chat. There's no specific chat.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Okay, so
It's
if I
gonna be
see
there.
anything, I'll try to pick it up. And
Yeah, and in case we will interrupt you if
Sure.
there's any question or any issues.
Sure. So I made a little presentation. Let me know if you see it.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. It's working. So even if I like go forward, it works, huh?
Yeah, it works. All good.
Perfect. Okay. So my small topic will be an introduction, because it's very hard to go in a lot of detail in a short session about how you identify and track vessels in general, and how you recognize and spot the patterns of what are called shadow vessels since the basically since the implementation of sanctions against Russia after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We have been starting to hear the term shadow fleet, shadow vessel, to indicate any kind of vessel that works, generally speaking, that works into any sort of contraband or smuggling activity, especially if it actively tried to hide its patterns, its ownership, its movements on the tools that I will show you now. So we'll get into detail about that. You might have heard the definition specifically linked to Russia, and many people talk about a Russian shadow fleet. From our point of view at ERP Media, we've been working on dodgy ship partners and behavior from ships and shipping companies that try to hide their patterns for a long time, and it's been the same people doing it. It's not specifically tied to Russia, and actually with the new war in Iran, you might have heard also talking about an Iranian shadow fleet. Now, of course, let's keep the definition broad. The shadow fleet as a concept, it doesn't belong to any nation. It's a way of working that is more the characteristic of some specific private companies, of some specific companies and actors in the shipping world in general. But let's start from the beginning. So, of course, the first step to tracking any ship is identifying it for sure. Now, this image is the summary of a ship description taken from Marine Traffic, but most shipping websites, and I will list you a few, give us a similar pattern. More in general, when we hear speaking about ships, we see them identified by name, by flag, and then there are these other codes, numbers, the IMO, the MMSC, and the call sign. Now, most of this identification, identificative, can give us only a partial picture of the whole thing. The ship has a name, but the name is not fixed. The name can change, and moreover, there are many ships all over the world that share the same name, and most of the active ships, especially the shadow fleet vessels, which tend to be quite older than normal vessels, they have a collection of names that they accumulated during the years. So the name is a good indication. It's very useful. It's very useful as a first, let's say, indication that the ship is the one that we look for, because that's the way they're more commonly referred to. If your investigation starts from, I don't know, a short article coming up on daily news, or if it starts from the what's the word, the press release of port authorities or anything like that, most likely the first information that you will get is the ship's name, but again, you cannot count on this to be a very effective identification tool. The flag is very important, but basically what the flag represents is what is the jurisdiction that the vessel refers to. So, of course, vessels have to follow the rules of the countries that they're in when they are in territorial waters. But as you probably know, as soon as you get further than 12 nautical miles from any coast, you are out of territorial waters. There are basically every country has 12 miles of territorial waters, which are considered fully part of the country's jurisdiction, country's land. And then there are another 12 miles of water from mile 12 to mile 24 that are considered contiguous waters. In these waters are no longer exactly part of the jurisdiction of the country, but it's still an area where countries can enforce some part of their jurisdiction to prevent some crimes, such as smuggling, also illegal immigration, drug trafficking, and stuff like that. So there is a legal right to work up to 24 miles. Once you're over 24 miles, the laws that apply on any ship are the laws of the flag that the ship is flagged. So basically, this example is a Portuguese ship, and as soon as this ship is in international waters, is subject to Portuguese law. This is particularly important and generates another specific system that is called flag of convenience, and I will explain about it if you want to, because these are the major point, the point of most interest for shipping companies about the flag is that the labor laws that are applied on the ship are the ones of the flag. This is why there are countries that have so many ships, or that's why so many ships and shipping companies choose specific flags, because they have very advantageous labor laws for hiring sailors and keeping their contracts normally as exploitative as possible. So yeah, normally we have Panama, Liberia, and many other specific administration all over the world that have become hubs for the shipping industry, and some of which are also considered flags of convenience, but we will get to that later. Then the IMO is the main and most important identifier of any ship. Is the only one that never changes, that is assigned to the ship when the ship is built and remains with the ship for all of its life. And it's the most important one that we will use to identify any ships that we want to investigate. Some ships don't have it because the IMO is only used on ships exceeding 100 tons. So it's used on from medium to large ships. Small ships, small boats do not have an IMO, as well as some other ships. The exceptions include some dedicated fishing vessels, private yachts, although some private yachts do have it, warships, and other military ships, let's say. But most of all the ships all around the world, all commercial ships, all tanker ships, and then also quite a bit of fishing boats, not all of them, as we were saying, are identified by IMO, and it's normally speaking the best way to identify a ship. It's assigned by International Maritime Organization, which is the United Nations authority that regulates shipping all over the world. So it's basically like missed the word in English, like the license plate of a ship, let's say, and it stays with it all the time. The MMSC, the Maritime Mobile Service Identity, can also be quite useful for identification, especially because this is a number that all fishing boats do have, even the ones that do not have an IMO. They do have an MMSI. The problem is that this number can change if the ship is sold or if it passes to another jurisdiction. It changes its flag, is going to change this number, so it does not remain constant throughout the life of the ships. And we will see that very often when we do this kind of investigations, when we investigate shadow vessels. we want to know the whole story of the ships, and we see that very often ships change ownership and flag. So it's something that can throw us off in some situations. Call sign, unless you're using a VHF radio, it's not a very useful tool to identify a ship. It's just, good to know, but I've never managed to, do research on any kind of vessel by using it. So let's go back to our IMO. Let's say for sure that this is the main tool that we are always going to use when we do this kind of investigations. Again, sorry. Okay, so as I was telling you, there are a number of very useful websites and databases that we can use to identify and track movement of ships. Sometimes when our only identification is visual, we can refer to, I don't know, if I click on something, do you still see my screen or not? Or do you,
Yes,
do you
we do.
still see the presentation? See the website I go to?
We can see the website as well.
Okay,
Yeah, we should be able to, yeah.
But are you seeing it now?
Yeah, we are seeing everything.
You're seeing ship spotting?
We do.
Okay, perfect. So this website is very useful to try, somewhat useful. It's not one of the most useful, but it's quite useful to try and do a visual identification of the ship. So sometimes maybe you took pictures of a ship in a certain area, and what you want to do is try to identify the vessel from its physical characteristics, then or you have similar ships with similar names and you want to know which one is which. This is a repository of pictures. As you can see, there are more than 3 million pictures online, that by looking for the ship, again, by name, can allow you to see many pictures of the ship. In this case, we used it in an investigation a long time ago to determine which ship of a certain fleet, fishing fleet, was the one that we were looking for. Now, in that occasion, and this happens very often with fishing fleets, all the ships had more or less the same name. And from the picture, it was not visible if it was, I don't remember the name of the ship, but let's say, Sea Queen 1, 2, or 3. We couldn't see if it was 1, 2, or 3. So we looked at all the Sea Queens on the ship spotting website and tried from the pictures to determine which one is which. Now, although the ships are very similar, I've never seen two ships that are exactly the same. Like almost all the times, I can't exclude the possibilities that there are two ships that are absolutely exactly the same, but despite the fact that they're all made in the same shipyards, the position of the structure changes in where the cranes are put. The nets are connected to the main structure of the ships, are always there, and so very often even a visual identification can be quite precise. But then again, and going back to our presentation here, let's go back. Some of the most useful websites in this case are the ones that give you a real-time feedback of where exactly the ships are, and some of these are listed here: Marine Traffic, Global Fishing Watch, Vessel Finders. Those are all websites that offer this service. The one that I use the most is Marine Traffic, and that's the one I wanted to show to you. So let's go there. Okay, so this map of the world that you see is feedback. It shows the position in real time. I'm going to go to the Mediterranean since we're talking from here. Each and every little arrow here is a ship in its position now. This feed is collected from the so-called IIS. The IIS, or Automatic Identification System, is a safety mechanism that all ships above a certain tonnage, again, we are talking about not every single boat, let's say, but most ships, most fishing boats, even if they don't have an IMO, all commercial vessels, Also, some military ships, although it's not always reliable, they have a transponder on board that communicates in real time the position and the activity of the vessel. So the IS gives not only information about the specific latitude and longitude, but also it tells you where the ship is headed, where the ship is coming from, if it's doing certain particular kind of maneuver, if it's engaged in a ship-to-ship operation in the high sea, if it's waiting for orders, all stuff like that. If there is a change in the draught of the ship, like if it's loading or unloading cargo, this is also relayed by the IAS. So it's really a lot of information that we can see in real time, and that, again, let's click on any of those ships. As we can see, this Fadiq Maltese flagged Ro-Ro cargo. A Ro-Ro cargo is a roll-on, roll-off cargo. So it's basically a ship built to transport vehicles, wheeled vehicles, be it cars or any other kind of vehicles. And they normally are commercial ships. Although from a technical point of view, also most ferries are Ro-Ro ships because they allow the passage of vehicles, of course. But as you can see, well, we'll get to that later. So in any case, when you see this, when you click on the ship, you get not only the position, but we see where the ship is coming from. It's mirroring Turkey, and where is this destined to? The port of Sète in France. I'm sorry, I'm sure I pronounce it badly. Not good with French. Anyway, so as we were saying, you see where it's coming from, where it's going, when it's going to arrive at its destination, and we can see its speed, we can see its draught, 7 meters, and the navigational status is underway using engine. We know that the position was received 26 minutes ago, so it's like pretty recent, but not exactly in real time. And then this website, by clicking on the vessel details, will tell us a lot of other things. Of course, as you can see, we have the ship completely identified by name, flag, IMO, MMSI, call sign. Well, it gives us other details that we don't very often need to know. Now, I'm not logged in, so we don't see everything that we could see. I could log in, but I think that is fair, considering that this is quite an expensive tool. It's interesting that I show you what is doable with a free account, which you can all start using like immediately, because there are some very precious informations that are already given in the free version of the ship. What the main thing that we can do with a paid account is look into the past of the ship. So for instance, if we look at the past track of the ship, which often in investigation is a very, very, very important information, and I will later show you in which sense with a case study. When we're using it with a free account, we can only see up to, if I'm not mistaken, 24 hours of movement. So we can see that in the last 24 hours, the Fadiq has moved from basically almost the Greek coast to the middle of the Tyrrhenian Sea, passing the Strait of Messina. It never stopped, never went to any port. It's not particularly interesting information at this point, but as I was telling you, again, we cannot go too much in the past. I will show you in a bit how the historical data looks like. But generally speaking, this is already a very useful tool to see, check, get the details of any ship. Like for instance, let's imagine that I want to know, for instance, the port of Civitavecchia, which is considered to be the port of Rome, is like 70 kilometers from Rome. It's a port that has a huge problem with cruise ships. So if I want to see at any moment how many cruise ships are there in the port of Civitavecchia, I can zoom in on the port and I can see dock by dock all these big ships, some of which are ferries like this one, and some of which are going to be surely cruise ships. Let's see if we can see any pictures of this one. There's always cruise ships, but Yeah, exactly. Here it is. And this can already be very useful information depending on what you're looking at, because we can get the details of the ship. Now, with the details of the ship, especially with the IMO, we can go to another extremely useful website, and also a website that is completely free, which is Equasis. Oh no, well, my passport has expired. Sorry, I didn't foresee this.
It does sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, really, because I really didn't. It does happen, but it's like only the second time that I have to change the password. I will have to do it, but maybe I have in my presentation data coming from this. Well, let's just give me a second. Okay, yeah, I can show you some documents extracted from this website. I can't show you now the search process, but I can swear to you it's very simple. The registration is free. The only caveat here, the only problem with this website is that you need to search the ships by IMO. You can also search them by name, but you will not get precise results. So normally the process is I identify the ship through whatever means I can find. Visual identification, I get directly the IMO from my initial source, or I go on marine traffic and I just go to this, I zoom in on the port where I am so I can see from my position where all the ships are. I click on any one of those and I get the details of that ships, and in their own page, detail page, I get the IMO. So once I have the IMO, I can go to Equasis using a password that works and search the ship by IMO. So you get a precise identification. You only get one vessel. And in that case, you will see something like this. This is the, let me, tell me if you can see it. Otherwise, I need to change some sharing settings.
No, we do.
You see everything on the screen, okay?
Yeah, we see everything.
PDF that I'm showing you here is extracted from Equasis and bears its logo, and it's the information about a specific ship that was searched by IMO. What is important is that this website gives us the owners of the ship, you know, here listed El Karraz HM from Tripoli, Libya, being the company that owns the ship. Now, let's stop here for a second. You will always find that there are, as you can see, not 100% of the time, but 99% of the time, there are at least 3 companies insisting on any single ship. The one that is the registered owner, then there is the ship manager or commercial manager, and then there is the ISM manager. Now, I remember, I think that, yes, here it is. So the registered owner is, you know, the company owning the ship. But contrary to what happens with other companies or with other research operation, in this case, very often the registered owner is not extremely interesting, because the way the maritime world works is that, again, we can't say this happens in all of the cases. It doesn't happen for very big established companies like MSC or Maersk, of course, but very often with smaller companies, there is a system where they create a company just to be the owner of any specific ship. So the company that owns the ship only exists to own the ship, and it's very often registered in a favorable jurisdiction that where you don't need to discover to declare the name of the physical person that is the owner of the ship. It remains owned just by the company, and the company does not have declared owners. Or sometimes they go into jurisdictions such as the Marshall Islands, which is a very, very common jurisdiction for ships, where the property of companies is allowed to the bearer So basically, there is a piece of paper in the safe of the office of a lawyer somewhere, and whoever holds that piece of paper is officially the owner of the ship, because it's the owner of the company. This allows the transfer of ships from one company to the other to be extremely quick and untraceable, favorable, and it's a system that is very, very common. So the company that normally we want to focus on when we do investigations on ships in general, be it for smuggling, drug trade, or human trafficking, or whatever else, arms trafficking, is the commercial manager, the ship manager. This is the company that takes all the contracts and that manages all the contracts on the ship. It's the company that decides which cargo is going to be loaded where and where it's going to be delivered. It's the company that you contact if you want to move something with their ship. So basically, it's the main actor of all the operations, and it's the one that we want to focus on. There is also a third company, the International Safety Manager, the company that is in charge of the safety regulations at sea. This company also is not particularly interesting, very rarely gives us something important, and in many cases, like the one here that I was giving you an example, it's also unknown as a company. Now, so basically what we want to focus on is the ship manager of the ship. Now, the database of Equasis, as you might see now, doesn't just give me, once I discovered which is the company that owns the ship, there is also, I can also look for the page on Equasis of the company. And in that case, I get a document looking like this one. This was done for another company. I'm sorry I don't have it directly of the one that we're looking at, but again, I didn't expect my password to have expired. By going on the page of the company, you can see the fleet of the company. So in this case, this company is the commercial manager and registered owner of 2 ships. And so I can know what are the other ships belonging to the same company. Now, this again is extremely important it's an extremely important passage in investigations of this kind. Whenever we investigate smuggling operations or things like that, is very common that it's important for us to know how many other ships might be involved in the same operation, because they're managed by the same company or by the same network of companies. So the fact that I can go on the page of a shipping company and know what are the other ships that they manage, in this case, there are a couple of fishing vessels. It's not a extremely interesting case, but yeah, we can, even for big companies, and have the list of all the ships registered under that ship manager. Now, of course, for particularly big companies, you have to first do also a normal company search to discover how many companies do they actually own, that where the fleet that they own might be spread among different companies, like a company for Europe, a company for Asia, of the same company. They have different companies that act as ship managers of each one part of the fleet that they occupy. So there are some cases, again, very rare, where just one company won't be enough. Generally speaking, starting from the identification, going to marine traffic to discover the IMO number of the ship that I'm looking at, and using that IMO number on Equasis, I can easily and for free of charge, discover who are the companies that own and what other ships they have in their fleet. So this is very often a very good starting point for all kind of investigations. Now, of course, things become more complex when we talk about shadow vessels, because although everything I've said still applies, they will actively try to make their position less known. You might find holes on Equasis where the company owning the ship is not declared, or things like that. We will go through a case study, an investigation done a year and a half ago, if I'm not mistaken, where we used extensively those tools. And this was an investigation into the activities of a dark fleet. Now, Lloyd's list, the Lloyd's, the insurance company that are that also publishes one of the most interesting specialized magazine on shipping and shipping activities, have defined the whole of the shadow fleets in existence under these 1, 2, 3, 4 different four scales of darkness, from gray to black, from gray, dark gray, dapple gray, and black, that that list how specific characteristic that they have and they do not have, classify them as being darker or lighter gray in what we consider, in any case, suspicious operations, let's say. For instance, they go with one of the first things that they name here is how the ships that are flagged. Now, this is, they talk about tankers here because looking for shadow vessels has been especially important with tankers lately since the sanctions to Russia, and not just to Russia, but the same characteristics can apply to any kind of cargo ship, basically. So let's say tankers or ships in general, they are flagged with registries such as Panama, which is very common, but that does not classify like one of the most dangerous flags. Again, I think that this is the moment where I open up the concept of flags of convenience in case someone doesn't know it. Flags of convenience are defined as flags belonging to countries that do very little to keep control of their ships. So there are, as we were saying, the jurisdiction of the country whose flag is flying on a ship is applied on that same ship. And this is important for labor reasons, but not just for that. If you want to board a ship on the high sea, if you are like a law enforcement vessel and you want to board a ship outside of your own territorial waters, you need permission from the flag country. So basically, the captain of the law enforcement ship will have to phone to the flag authority of that country that the vessel is flagging and ask for permission to conduct boarding operations or inspection operations on the ship that they want to. And some of these jurisdictions just never answer this phone, and those are considered, again, an ulterior reason for considering these flags of convenience that help operate dark, illegal, or semi-legal activities at sea. Some of these countries that have, there are countries like Bolivia that has very active shipping registry, despite the fact that they don't have access to the sea. But the most important and the biggest ones are probably Panama, Marshall Islands, and Liberia. Liberia in particular has a huge amount of shipping companies, all registered at the same address. There are like hundreds of shipping companies all over the world that are registered at 80 Broad Street in Monrovia. Because again, Liberia is a country that doesn't really control what the ships do, doesn't really check what their ships do, allows free reign to all activities, and it's also very convenient for labor and tax reasons to operate. So some of these ships, some of these flags registry, the most important ones, despite the fact that they still favor very much the companies and have labor laws that don't defend very much the sailors, still need or want to collaborate internationally, not to be blacklisted, not to be seen as in the same way as we see tax havens in some cases. And so they started collaborating more, and this is why flags such as Panama in the list that I'm showing you now are considered gray or light gray, despite the fact that they are, for many reasons, a flag of convenience. Panama is a ship jurisdiction that does collaborate with foreign authorities, with law enforcement authorities, and so it's not considered extremely dangerous. Then again, other characteristic of the gray fleet is that there are irregularities in the IIS. Now, the IIS, again, is the transponder system that on websites such as Marine Traffic allows us to see the positional real time of every ship. But there is an important point here. The transponder is on board the ship and can be turned off by the ship at any time. So very often when we track a ship that is doing suspicious activities, we will see it disappear from our radars and reappear several days or sometimes even months later in a different position. And we will know that we will not be able to know exactly where that ship has been while the IIS was turned off. So this is what they mean here when they say that there are irregularities in the IIS, especially when these irregularities correspond to long stays in waters of countries or areas that are known for illegal activities, smuggling activities to take part a lot. And again, here they list Venezuelan waters, Iranian waters, areas of West Africa, Ceuta, close to Gibraltar. It's also an area where there are many operations of this kind. The more we go darker in the definitions, the more the operations will be openly suspicious. Now, flags that are on the blacklist are used, such again, Cameroon, Togo, Comoros, Belize, Sierra Leone, and there are often big gaps in the IIS signal. There is, again, a history of flag hopping, like switching registries frequently, and it's not known who the insurer is of the company, or they use minor companies for insurance. Now, in some of our investigations, we also found that ships falsify their insurances and they travel with fake ones. So, you know, this is another, of course, clear sign of illegal activities. So again, don't want to go into all details, but you know, the more you have this kind of classifications, the more you see IIS gaps, the more you see that the ship relies on opaque jurisdictions for its companies, for its flag, and for its operations, the more you can categorize it as a potential dark vessel. Now, the investigation that I was telling you about, that we did a year and a half ago, and or more, I don't remember exactly, and that we used as and I want to use that as an example here of how you use these tools, was the case of the Aristo, a small tanker with a Cameroon flag that was arrested in Italy for not having a double hull. So the double hull is a structural feature that tanker ships that carry dangerous products, all kind of oil derivatives, must have if they want to work in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean forces ship to have the double hull. And so this ship was stopped for not having that. But on the inspection, they saw that the captain could not prove the origin of the diesel fuel that the ship was carrying, so not of their cargo, not of their tank, and that fuel had been transferred to the Norman Maximus, a ship that at the moment was chartered by the Italian company Saipem, so a publicly owned, big, important company in Italy. So of course it appeared that an important public company in Italy was buying illegal fuel from a shadow vessel that had arrived very close to the coast of Sicily. Now, they seem to have made some sort of mistake here, or to have taken too many risks, because they did the ship-to-ship operation in Italian territorial waters. So they were absolutely subject to the jurisdiction of our law enforcement, and they were immediately they were stopped this time. But then when we started to look at the previous movements of the Aristo, and this is again how the data of marine traffic appears when you have a paid for account, those are screenshots from our investigation, we could see that the ship, I don't know if you see my cursor as well, but anyway, that the ship was traveling towards the coasts of Libya and coming back. Again, more in detail, we could see that in the last year, from when it was caught the whole year before, it had done at least 4 trips towards the coast of Libya, disappearing. You see here is, what's the word, tratteggiato, like it's no longer full line, but it's a broken line, yeah? This broken line here is the sign that the website Marine Traffic is inferring the position of the ship when the IIS was turned off. So basically it disappeared in this point and it reappeared in this other point. Nobody knows where it was in the middle. Now, here we do not have historical, we don't have exactly the dates because those are just screenshots, but I can tell you that there were several weeks, if I'm not mistaken, between here and here. So of course the ship did not just travel in a straight line very slowly from one point to the other, but it could have gone anywhere in this several weeks when their IIS was turned off. And we saw that this pattern was repeated at least 4 times in the last year. So we started to, the question became, how many ships are doing the same? How many ships are doing the same kind of operation that the Aristo is doing? And how many potential smugglers do we have now working between the Libyan coast and Europe in general, Italy? So of course we need to, restrict the scope of the research because it can be particularly big and difficult. There are of course hundreds and hundreds of ships, and we decided let's make a list, and this is doable via Marine Traffic. Let's make a list of all the ships that are older than 15 years, so not new, that are oil product tankers, but they're not crude oil tankers because we wanted to look at the smuggling of refined fuel. As you know, we have sanctioned, for instance, Russian oil products such as diesel and fuel, all kinds of fuel completely. But there is a price cap that still allows for the trade of crude oil. So we excluded crude oil because we could not know, at least not from simple shipping data, as we should be able to access the bills of lading and the contracts, but we cannot know from shipping data if a crude oil ship is doing a legal or an illegal operation. So we decided to exclude them. Size is also a very important thing. Normally, everybody that operates shadow fleet vessels or that is engaged into smuggling activities know that there is a risk that they will lose the ship, that the ship will be impounded somewhere. So normally they try to use ships that are not worth too much money in themselves. And a ship with these characteristics, so it's below 80 meters long and older than 15 years old, can be worth, I don't know, less than €1 million as scrap metal, which means that if the single or if with 2 or 3 illegal operations you make more than that that level of profit, then it's worth it their while. Then it's worth destining a specific ship to illegal operations for the whole end of its life. So we started with this characteristic, but we decided to further refine our search by flag because then we got too many hits. And this is, again, this is what appeared, like giving this characteristic to the to Marine Traffic to filter all the vessels that they had on their database by these characteristics. We found all of these ships which were still too many. That's why we started further refining them by flag, choosing flags of convenience and choosing, where is it? Let's go. Sorry, I'm going ahead, but this was another very important detail that allows us to refine the list. So we especially focused on the ships that had changed ownership after sanctions had been applied, because all of those ships that were worth not so much until the application of the sanctions suddenly had a new life. There was new interest in them, and they were sold for very good prices all over the world, passing from light jurisdictions to more opaque jurisdictions. And they started operating as shadow vessels all of a sudden. So we looked, and this is an information that is available on Equasis. Those are tables extracted from Equasis that tell us, as I was showing you before, who the owners are of the companies. And as those are real shadow vessels, you see that in some cases, like for the Nobel, it doesn't know which company bought it. It says reportedly sold, undisclosed interest. It doesn't tell me which company it went to for real, but it does tell me that the sale happened in December 2023, which is already, the first, not exactly the beginning, but already one of the moments where the application of sanctions was making those ships very interesting. So we further refined our list of ships by looking at the ones that had been sold between 2022 and 2023. And we got, in that way, to a smaller list of like some 90 ships, if I'm not mistaken. Then we defined this area, according to what we saw in the movements of the Aristo before, as an area of interest that we named Benghazi Triangle of Smuggling. It's not an official name, it's the one that we used. So we draw this area on marine traffic, and then we ask to the database which ships turned their IAS off when entering this area. And that's when we got our final list of ships, which is not this. This is the example. So basically, those are all the filters that we applied on this research. My fleet, old shore tankers, so with the characteristics that I showed you before, inside a specific area with an IAS non-detectable or turned off inside a certain period of time. Now, we did it for different periods of time, but those were the results that we had. Basically, these ships in that period had passed in the area that we designed and had turned off their IAS. Then, of course, we had to look at all of them manually, one by one, right, to understand exactly what happened, because in some cases, when you have a IAS that is non-detectable, it's just a technical error. I mean, you have to be sure that is a repeated action and that it's done in areas of interest with a certain logic. Otherwise, most likely it's just, a problem in the reception of the signal that was not captured for a while. And we cannot specifically say that it was turned off for illicit reasons or dodgy reasons. So we had to look at all the specific movements of the ships, and we saw that there were basically two categories inside the list of the ships that we looked at. Some that were doing from the eastern part of the Mediterranean, especially Turkey and Egypt, and from the Black Sea, and in some cases directly from Russian ports such as Novorossiysk. They were coming towards the Tobruk, Benghazi area, anyway, the area that we had designed, turned their areas off, and then reappeared going back towards their part of the sea. This is one of the cases. The Grace Felix was one of the ships that was doing this, coming directly from Russian ports through the Black Sea. And in other cases, we saw other ships such as the Aristo that were doing the same movement westward, so coming towards our waters. So let's say that this allowed us to realize, and was later confirmed by speaking with the investigators and analysts in the Libyan area, that there was the emergence of a new transshipment area where fuel was being illegally exchanged. Fuel coming from sanctioned countries such as Russia could be easily exchanged in the high seas with ships that were coming from the east to ships that were going to the west, making the possibility of tracking this fuel extremely complex, because again, with the Aristo, our local enforcement could not go for jurisdiction reason or opportunity reasons beyond the trip of the Aristo itself. For sure, we don't know we still don't know where that fuel came from, who supplied it exactly to the Aristo. But what we can know, and what we did, was, realizing and describing a whole fleet during the same operations of the single case of the Aristo, at least on a Mediterranean scale. Now, yeah, I would say this is it for this case. I hope I was clear enough, but I imagine that there might be questions, and because I think it's quite a complex topic. And if there aren't, I'll show you something else.
Please, if you have question, type it down here in the chat. Otherwise, Giulio, you can move to the next topic.
Yeah. So this is more of a question of how you take your investigations the extra step, because as I was telling you, there are limits to what you can know through databases and online tools. Of course, they are extremely useful and extremely effective, but at a certain point, some informations, such as the names of the real owners, or what exactly is on board a specific ship, things like that, can only be deducted from work on the ground. So how do you start doing this work on the ground? Now, of course, I imagine that all of us have limited resources, limited possibility to travel, and this is of course a problem, especially because we're talking about a sector that is international by definition, and so forces us to go sometimes very far. But this is a tip that we discovered through our investigations that can really give you some shortcuts. So there is another database which is very interesting, and is the database of the Memorandum of Understanding of Paris, basically an agreement that certifies what kind of safety operations and equipment every ship must have while traveling in a specific part of the sea. There are many of those Memorandum of Understanding. There is the Mediterranean MOU, the Paris MOU, the Tokyo MOU. Each one regulates specific one of the 7 seas, let's say. The Paris MOU is particularly interesting because it also applies to all of Europe, so not only the Mediterranean but all of Europe. So it's very wide area with a lot of ports, with a lot of very important ports such as Antwerp, Rotterdam, all fall under the jurisdiction, under the agreement of the Memorandum of Understanding of Paris. Now, what's interesting here, if you can see it on my screen, is this inspection database here. So if I have the IMO of any specific ship that I'm interested in, let's take the one of the Aristo, although so from marine traffic, we take the IMO of the Aristo, the one that we already talked about, and we go to the Paris MOU website and we search. We need to add a period, I'm afraid. Let's go in the past, which is when the Aristo was still navigating, let's say from 2022, May of April 2022 to 2024. And let's hope we get a result. Yeah. So here there was only one inspection, and the inspection encountered, so we can get the details of the inspection. And this is interesting because we see that the Aristo, built by the way in 1964, very old ship, was inspected in June 2023 in the port of Piraeus in Greece, and that they found 14 deficiencies on the ship. And all of these deficiencies are listed here, like what was missing, and where yeah, exactly. Here, fire safety, ventilation, none is required, labor conditional protection, fencing around dangerous machinery, none is required. So very, very detailed things that ships must have and that were not acted as required. Why this is interesting, again, considering that it's an inspection done years ago. This is because although in this case the inspection did not lead to a detention, we only see that it caused an expanded inspection. In some cases, I don't know, let's try with another ship in case, but in some cases you will see that the ship was detained on port because of the failures in the safety inspection. And in that case, what happens is that the real owner of the ship, very often hidden between companies, behind companies and lawyers, needs to appear, needs to come out and buy the things that the ship is missing, because otherwise the ship will not leave the port. So what happens? The company will have to contact a naval agent inside the port where the ship has been detained. And that naval agent will act as a liaison between the owner of the ship and the local authorities, and will physically go and buy all the pieces of equipment that were missing on the ship and that the ship needs to leave again. Why is this interesting? Because these naval agents have this ship owners as one-time customers with no loyalty towards the naval agent itself and vice versa. So this means that these naval agents become excellent sources. Now, of course, this specific inspection did not result in a detention. And even if this specific inspection did result in a detention, a huge port such as the port of Piraeus will make it very hard for us as journalists to identify which one was the naval agent that actually worked with the ship. But if I go through a list of inspection of the ships that I work with, and I find that there was an inspection in a smaller port, in our case, it happened both in the port of Crotone in southern Italy and in the port of Rhodes in Greece, that those were smaller ports, and the ships that we were looking into, one for drug trafficking and the other for weapon smuggling, had been stopped and detained by local authorities in those ports. And in that case, we just went to the port physically. Thankfully, they were not very expensive trips, and we could afford it. We could do it. We looked around the port until we found the naval agent that had worked with that company. And, we started chatting with them, and these people not having any reason to not tell you if you are, you apply your normal journalistic skills in making people talk. They gave us extremely detailed and important information, including the ship manifest, the name of the crew, the names of the crew, all the information that they had gotten, including very often who was the real owner, who was the guy that pays for the stuff for real. So even if the ship is owned by a fake company, a shell company that's only there to hide the true owner, that true owner will have to pop out in certain situation. And one of the most interesting choke points is exactly when there is a naval inspection. So Paris MOU website with its list of all inspections done to ship becomes a point that can reveal to an investigator where it's worth going, where it's worth trying and going to discover the most secretive details of the ships. I hope this was interesting. I think I will close it here. My time is almost up. And yeah, I will open up for questions if you have any, and stop sharing.
Thanks, Giulio. There are 2 questions for you.
Okay. How did you identify the relevant naval agent the old way? I just went to all of them and asked, did you work with were you the one that worked with So in one case, there were so few naval agents in Rhodes that I just went door by door to all the naval agents on port until I understood the other one. And in other cases, we got the information from the port authority. We went to the port authority and asked, when you stopped this ship for the inspection, who was the naval agent that worked with you? Who was the naval? And then they told us, oh yeah, it was this guy that wanted in contact with us from the owner to buy the stuff. So I would say that the best thing to do is to go to the port authority and ask. And this might work even in big ports, because when you have too many naval agents and it's really impossible to do it the simple way, like going door by door. The port authority can tell you.
And then, maybe, Giulio, at least once we obtained the name of a naval agent from an indictment in Italy.
Yeah,
was
yes.
there.
Sometimes can be there. Yeah, sometimes it can be there. But if the ship has not been subject to any investigation, if you're doing the investigation, starting from scratch, you might not have that luxury, but still there might have been an inspection. Those are standard routine safety inspections that are done, every now and then. So it's still a door that remains open, even if the ship have never been investigated. And then what was the assessment that led you to go to the port in person rather than asking over the phone? Well, you want to build relation. This is still not something that anybody owes you. I told you there is no loyalty, no particular link between the naval agent and the ship owner so strong that the naval agent will not want to talk to you, or would be afraid, or would be reticent to talk towards a journalist. But still, you have to consider that a lot of people will give sensitive information over the phone to someone that you don't know. So it's still worth going in person, spending some time with them, showing that you understand how hard their work is, or pretending that you understand how hard their work is, chatting them up, talking about the ship, explaining why you're interested, appealing to their sense of civic duty, and then you will get the information. So it's not something that you can do by phone. Like it's something that works well when it's done in person. And these people do not see a lot of people, so they're not bothered by us going there. And there are also, which is fantastic, in a world where there are increased limitations in the possibilities that journalists have to talk to official law enforcement sources. Those are civilians just like us, so they can just decide to tell you everything. And following on the previous one, have there been any instances in which you have considered paying for info like this? It never happened. It was never needed so far to pay for this information. Generally speaking, as an ethical, deontological behavior, we do not pay sources. You cannot really trust information that you paid for. They're gonna tell you what you want to hear. It's not something that we do. If you consider payment, just a dinner, again, it never happened. It never happened. It was never needed. And I would try to refrain from going into this gray area. I don't think it's really needed. Again, either the naval agent for some reason doesn't want to talk to you, or she does. Very often, again, the best weapon has been explaining why we're doing this, and they're citizens, and they it's not, you're not counting on the fact that they dislike the people that they work with, but you're counting on the fact that they are not particular fans either of this shady world. Like you count on the fact that they are honest citizens, especially the one in Rhodes, where the ship that we were looking at was we investigated it for weapons smuggling. Like, he was more than happy to give us all the information, and he said that those people, referring to his client, are the problem with his business. So he was very, very willing to give us the information. So I would say I would not consider the possibility of having to bribe anyone for this information. It's not information that you have to pay someone for. On the other hand, we do pay a lot of money to Marine Traffic to have a premium account. So money goes out anyway. If you want to spend money, consider a premium account on Marine Traffic, which is very useful. So that's it, I would say.
Maybe in addition to this point, we can also name the fact that the maritime world is not so big in terms of professionals that are involved. So sometimes you can get to a naval agent, for example, from a seafarer, and maybe a seafarer you can get in contact with him or her through a trade union or an association that represent the seafarers. That's one of the ways to get in contact with these kind of people and trying to build up some relationship that maybe help you at the end of the day to reach out the key naval agent that can help you for a specific investigation.
Okay, so I have a sets of questions here from Lorenzo Bodrero. Thank you. Those are very interesting. So how reliable is drop data in marine traffic for determining if a ship loaded or unloaded cargo on a certain point? So it's both very reliable and extremely unreliable. There is one thing that you need to keep in mind. The data on draught is put in the IAS by the crew of the ship. It's not automatically detected by the IAS. So that means that the crew that is interested in putting that data, because that data will then, act as a safety information. So for instance, if I put that my draught is 7 meters, my IAS will immediately alert me if my GPS position is going into an area of the sea where the water is shallower than 10 meters, because I'm already at risk if I have 7 meters of draught in a 10 meter shallow sea. So I want to put a reliable data in because it's for my own safety. That's why I put it there. So if the data is there, it's reliable, but you cannot always count on the fact that they will put it there. So if I'm doing an illegal operation, I am transferring a shitload of fish that I caught illegally off the coast of Libya, and I'm transferring it to an Italian ship. Well, the Italian ship is not going to register the change in draught there, right? Because it will reveal that they did something illegal in the high seas. So the data is reliable when you find it, but you cannot assume that it's always being recorded. So you need to look at other details that might indicate this thing. And this is, of course, connected to your second question. The data is not actively manipulated, so they cannot tell that the ship was in India if the ship was in Pakistan or whatever. No, I don't know if it was in. They cannot put a false position so easily, but sometimes they manage to make the transponder bounce differently, so it appears that the ship is elsewhere. The point is that it's not very good manipulation. That's why they almost always just resort to turning it off instead of manipulating it, because there will be data monsters that appear, like a ship that suddenly has done 200 kilometers in any direction in a matter of hours. So if you try to manipulate the data of the IAS, you end up having something that looks more fake and more suspicious than simply turning it off. So statistically, I would say the data is reliable of the position until it's turned off. It's technically possible to make it appear that like you're in a different place, but in the flow of data that is day to day and every hour, it appears too fake to be effective. Are the efficiencies available to FOIA to port authorities? Probably, but not needed. The actual deficiencies in an inspection are already listed on the Paris MOU website, so you don't need to know about that. So the limits are always the same. If it's an active investigation, they will not respond to a freedom of information request, because those are judicial acts and not public administration acts. And the customs will still protect data that is considered proprietary. Breaching commercial secret of things like that. There are the usual limitation to FOIA requests in that sense. But if you just want to know what deficiencies a boat had an inspection, it's already available on the Paris MOU website. You don't need to do FOIAs. I hope I answered correctly. Could you talk a bit more about the nature of the typical relationship between register and ship managers? No, well, normally typically they actually are the same person. Like, again, the registered owner is a company that was created by the ship manager to be the owner of the company, so that if they want to sell that ship, they can just, do it instantly without registering the sale anywhere, and they can do it in an instant. So the point is, I am the ship manager, the commercial manager, and I hold the ownership. I not indirectly, but I hiddenly, because they're registered in the bloody Marshall Islands or something like that. But I also own the ships, or to say it better, I also own the companies that own the ships. But I don't own the ship directly. Instead, I decide to own them through other companies to make my structure more opaque and more flexible, so I can change it very easily. So we often see this happens if a ship does something illegal in a repeated fashion. Before the most illegal trip, or before the start of a series of illegal trips, it may often change ownership all of a sudden, so that it's no longer tied to the one that held it before. Aristo, before doing illegal stuff, was owned by a not huge but significant Greek company, and we do not have proof that company was connected in any way to the illegal activities that Aristo did. But it's an element of suspicion that one should investigate further if he can. So the kind of relationship very often is that they are the same entity, actually, and it's just the structure of ownership that is made so that it's more flexible. And if that's it, thank you very much.
Thank you, Giulio. Maybe just some quick remarks before closing this long and I hope profitable session of trainings. So we started from public funds and different contracting authorities that you need to find in order to get some information about how some public budget has been spent. Then we went into tools like DATACROS and Sayari in order to disclose what is hidden into opaque corporate structure, and we try to define also what is an opaque jurisdiction. We moved to the analysis of what is a green fund, and we understand how some of the labels can be hijacked somehow by the market in order to be as profitable as possible. And then in the latest session, we try to explain what can you do with database like ship spotting, marine traffic Equasis, and how sometimes there are pieces of information hiding in plain sight. You just need to find the right database. Sometimes it's not enough, but at least this could be the lead for interesting investigation. I really want to thank Transcrime, Crime and Tech, and the whole DATACROS team, because we are joining this project since the very beginning, and it helped us a lot, even to get better in terms of how we do our investigation, in terms of how what kind of researching question we ask ourselves, and I think that trying to deal with this kind of topics and trying to have even different approaches and combining them into a single investigation could really help to try to have different point of view and different approach. So thanks a lot again. Anything else, Michael?
Maybe I'll just add thanks to you guys. Thanks to Yurpi for an incredible training session, for putting this together, and for being with us from the beginning of DATACROS through it all. And yeah, in the chat, you guys should still have access to the emails of the different presenters And so if you have anything you want to follow up with, at least myself, I'm available. I think Lorenzo as well. Please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you to everyone who
Thank you very
joined
much.
today.
Thank you.